Okay, so we are calling to order May 19th meeting of school committee. It is 9:40 a.m. This is a remote meeting due to the COVID closure. Frida did not submit any public comments to me, so I don't believe we have any public comments for this meeting. In addition, we invite the public to be able to watch us on WinCam, as always, to ensure public access. I don't see our student reps here this morning. If I am missing somebody, there's a lot of us here this morning. If I'm missing them, let me know. I do not see them. So if they are able to join us later, we'll certainly be happy to hear from our student reps. We do have a change to the agenda this morning. We are going to push our FY budget discussion a little bit later in our meeting when Dr. Evans is able to join us. And we are going to start with an update on building projects and facilities with Mr. Nixon and with Ms. Whitmore. Would you like to start us off with an update on where we are on those things?
So Michelle, can I just ask a question? Do we know when Dr. Evans would be joining us this morning?
She was hoping to be here shortly. She was hoping to be here by 9:45, okay. But she had another meeting that conflicted with this one.
So I didn't realize she wasn't with us for the beginning of the meeting. To the extent we can have her on board for projects and facilities, I'd feel a little more comfortable. But can I maybe just suggest, can we kick off like school committee reports or something, which is typically at the end of the agenda, just to get that out of the way?
We can also start with the year-end celebrations and the handbooks while we have the principals here as well.
Yeah, I mean, whatever your pleasure is.
If you would like to hold off till Dr. Evans is available, Chris, I think we can start with the year-end celebrations because these are reports to us by
okay.
the principal and representatives from the schools. Mr. Lynn, are you able to talk to us about what McCall is doing for their year-end celebration and their moving on ceremony?
Sure, I'll be happy to. So the plan right now is we will hold a virtual celebration on the 19th, which is the last day of school. And we're thinking right now in the morning, we'll do some sort of a virtual ceremony that will be streamed out, okay? Or either we do it as a webinar. And so the ceremony will include the principal, myself making a remark. Right now, my music teachers are working on seeing if we can organize a performance, both from the orchestra and from the chorus. We're also going to do our award presentation, as well as our yearbook dedication. So very much what we typically do for a ceremony part, we will do virtually, either as a webinar or streamed out live. And then in the afternoon, what we're planning on doing is to have the students come by the middle school. And the way that we're going to do that is to ask the parents to drive the students through the back circle or up Mystic Valley and go into the back circle in McCall. And then they will come by and me and also the teachers will be present, and we will present the certificate, moving on certificate to the students through the car windows. And depends on what are the social distancing guidelines that are in place. We certainly will put all the safety precautions in place. And then after that, we will have photographers there, and they will take a picture of the students, probably sticking their heads out the window with the certificate, certainly not with the cars moving at the time, but the photographer will be there to document the moment. And to organize this, we will definitely have police detail there to help us navigate, control the traffic. And we're also going to organize it by team. So for example, we might go from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock. That will be the gold team. And the gold team will come by, and the gold team teachers will be there to celebrate with the kids by clapping and waving. And again, we feel like this would be a nice thing to do for the students to be able to see McCall for the very last time, and also have a chance to bid farewell and also, see the teachers one last time before they head off to the high school. So right now, that's our tentative plan.
Michelle, we can't hear you.
Thanks. I'll stop here and take questions about 8th grade moving on.
I was just wondering if there is a rain date.
We are not planning for a rain day right now because I think the logistics of what we do for that day is going to be pretty challenging. And because we have to organize multiple personnel to be there. So right now we're not planning on doing a rain date. And since the ceremony is mostly going to be, the students will be in the cars, right? And so we don't anticipate that rains will impact that. As for the staff, we certainly will be setting up pop-up tents to prevent people from getting wet or being impacted by the weather. So right now we're not planning on the rain day. So it's really rain or shine. We're going forward.
Okay. Yeah, that's mainly I was wondering about the staff because standing out in the afternoon for hours, handing out the items, I thought would be challenging for the staff if they were rained on. But thank you so much. I love the idea of virtual ceremony in the morning and then the moving on in the cars in the afternoon. So thank you.
I just, Mr. Lynn, I just want to say that having been through one of these ceremonies in the gymnasium when it's hot and crowded, this actually sounds like a pleasant change, even if we didn't have COVID. So I'm really excited about this. Thank you.
Okay, I think like a lot of things that we learned during school closure, a lot of things that we thought are kind of like second best might actually turns out to be something that we'll continue moving forward with. So you never know that this might be something that we'll stick with. So we'll see.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you. As a parent of an 8th grader, I just want to thank you guys for thinking through this so clearly and for being able to give the kids an opportunity to really make a meaningful transition. I know that none of this is easy for any of our school levels to organize, but and this goes for Andrea representing elementary schools and Paula at the high school too. We really appreciate everybody really being so thoughtful about this. Paula, did you want to share with us what the high school is planning? Are you in on those plans?
I am in on those plans. They're not public yet. I can tell you that we're working on the same weekend that graduation was going to happen, but we're moving it to June 6th, the Saturday, to give us a little more wiggle room for the weekend. We have a very detailed and safe plan that we've been working on with WPD, our head of facilities. Dot Butler has been instrumental in helping us work it out. We've elicited some student feedback on what they would like to see. And our plan is actually to publish the full details of the plan to the senior students and their families at the end of this week. So they'll have very detailed directions about what will happen and how we can hold a graduation ceremony in a safe, responsible way, but still, honor the hard work of those seniors.
And Ms. Kona, so I also understand that you were able to arrange these plans in coordination with some of representative group of the students themselves and through surveys. And this was not just an adult only operation at the high school, but it involved a lot of students and their families as well.
Yeah, so Dennis has worked very closely with the senior class government representatives, so the 4 students who serve as the senior class officers, their advisors, Ms. Keene and Ms. Costas. And in addition to his regular meetings with the senior student government members, he did send out a survey to all senior students asking them for their feedback on all of the usual end of year things we do, what they would like to see, how they would like to see those, if we can do them, and when they would like to see them happen. So we sort of used a bunch of different ways to try and get as much student feedback as we could without being in the building to actually talk to students.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other members?
So,
Brian?
Probably beyond the scope of this conversation, but I know that the senior class has been raising funds for a number of years, and I didn't know, where the thoughts are on that. Obviously, if some of the events that would normally take place can take place, then that's where the funds can go. But I didn't know if there were eventualities, if they were unable to do that, or if this might be way beyond the scope of what we're talking about, but I'm just curious where your thoughts are on that as we move forward.
We are in conversations with, again, the class advisors and the 4 student government officers about that. Again,
Okay.
Dennis has had regular meetings. They know that is their money,
Yeah.
to spend on their events. And so as we talk about what these events could look like either now or in the future, that financial piece is playing a part of that conversation.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Michelle, if I could through.
Yeah.
So Brian, I've also had conversations with Mr. Mahoney about this right along since things started to get canceled, especially with the amount of money that had been associated with the prom. And we're continuing to have ongoing conversations just to make sure that that we know that the money is there and how it's going to be expended by the students.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions? Sharon, Zena? Great. Okay, thank you. Ms. Failing, could you speak to us a little bit about what the elementary schools are planning? I know each of them have their own unique little spin on their celebrations normally, but is there anything in common that they're doing? How are they marking this for the 5th graders?
Actually, we've been working really closely together at all the principals at the elementary level to have more of a consistent approach to our moving up or on ceremony. So we all have decided to do a reverse parade where each class of grade 5 students would have a designated time. The 5th grade students will drive in their cars with their families. We asked for each family to only have 1 car, and the staff will, following social distancing protocols, will all be lined in the Ambrose driveway and in the other school driveways and in their drop-off areas. We'll be standing 6 feet apart and cheering and waving and congratulating the cars as they go by. And the last stopping point, either a parent volunteer or the teacher will be handing each child a gift bag, which typically includes a yearbook or some token that the students will take on with them to McCall. So we were very excited about this. We did a lot of thinking around this. Each school will have a small virtual component. For example, at Ambrose, we have a video of the students, and the 5th grade teachers and myself and Michelle Kelly will be giving them their speeches virtually. And we do not have a rain date. We are very durable teachers at the elementary level, and we will stand out in the rain and cheer those students and families on.
Excellent. Questions for Ms. Phelan about the elementary schools? Well, and again, we thank you all for making these transitions as meaningful as possible for the kids and for the staff. I know that it's hard for you to not have an opportunity to say goodbye and transition the kids as well. So we really thank you for trying to make as meaningful as possible.
Michelle, can I just chime in with a quick question?
Sure.
So on the elementary, I appreciate from James the fact that we're going to have Winchester police there. I think he said on the 19th, just to manage traffic. Are we doing something similar at the elementary schools? I mean, I'm thinking of some of those pinch points, like for Ambrose, right off the street, and Morocco off Washington, and so forth. Is there some conversation about police detail too, or did I miss that?
Yes, and to clarify, our events will be on June 18th. We have all been in contact with Officer Paranik and have all devised plans that he has been involved with. He is also having the resource officer, Frank Batchelor, be helpful to us as well. So we've all run our plans by him, and we've been in constant contact with him.
Great, thank you very much.
The kids up to Ms. Phelan, correct? Or not everybody is coming at once.
Correct. Not everyone is coming at once. For example, at Ambrose, we have 4 grade 5 classrooms. Each grade 5 classroom is designated 20-minute period. We will have people lining the cars up and have them orderly in our back parking lot and then have them drive through. We will not be blocking any of the high street traffic, or it won't be an issue.
Any other member questions for Ms. Phelan?
Oh, I just wanted
Great.
to say thank you for the planning towards the 5th grade moving on. That's wonderful to hear. So, and I really appreciate that you're trying to make it as special as possible. Part of the 5th grader and the 8th grader. So, thank you so much.
So I do see that Dr. Evans has joined us now. So I'd like to just go back and take our agenda back in order then. And that would bring us to our FY21 budget discussion. So as we come closer to approaching town meeting, as we've talked in the past, has recommended a 277 increase in the school budget, and the select board and Lisa Wong, the town manager, have approved our 374. So we're still a little bit apart on where we need to be going into town meeting. And our working group has been sharing information and numbers. I have shared out to you the budget forecast outlook that Lisa Wong has shared with FinCom. And this morning we are going to have a discussion about a couple of different budget options that we see as possibilities going forward. I'm going to let Dr. Evans and Ms. Whitmore take the 329 and the 374 budgets independently and talk about how they arrived at those numbers and what their recommendations are for us around them. And then we'll have some opportunity for some discussion about both of those budgets at the end.
Sure.
Dr. Evans, would you like to take that?
Yes, and I apologize for my tardiness. I was chairing an important SEAM collaborative a board meeting, and we ran over, and so my apologies. So the planning for the FY21 budget is complicated, and we've discussed this several times. There are several unknowns, including the revenue projections, the costs for managing the pandemic, and the increased pressure on enrollment resulting from the closure of St. Mary's School. And so with all of those variables, put together 3 documents. One document was a summary of all of the new positions that we had asked for and why they were needed, and then the impact on program and services, particularly in light of what's likely to be a very difficult fall with social distancing and distance learning and social emotional needs. And so what the Finance Committee has done, they were given that document as well. They're holding fast at their original about 1% reduction to our ask, mainly because they're concerned about the long-term financial planning related to both town and school. So what we'd like for a school committee perspective is to weigh in on some of the potential reductions to new positions that have not yet been filled, and provisioning for the COVID-19 additional anticipated costs. So I'm going to ask Ellen Whittemore to kind of walk us through both the 329 and 374 budget that you have in front of you. The advantage to having a summary sheet like this is you know the exact anticipated costs for each of the new positions, but changes to any of these additions can have sort of a trickle-down effect in other areas, and so it's worth getting a sense for where the school committee would go should reductions be necessary. I anticipate they will be necessary, but as you know, up to and including the night of town meeting, school committee budgets get revoted depending on known variables, and sometimes there are changes. And so, Ellen, do you want to walk us through those too?
Absolutely. So if you look at the document that shows a 3.29% increase, 2020, This budget takes the 3.74 budget that school committee had previously voted and reduces it by 0.45% or $248,771. That number is reached by taking the elementary instructional coach position and reducing it from a 1.0 ask to a 0.5. It also takes the K-5 adjustment counselor position that had been a 1.0 ask, reducing that to 0.5. Then it takes the dean of students position from the high school, which was budgeted as a 1.0, and reduces it. Actually, it effectively eliminates that position. Then it also takes the special ed transportation and reduces that by $65,000 for, I'm sorry, reduce it by $65,000 because we would be able to utilize circuit breaker reimbursement for out-of-district transportation to offset those costs. So those reductions of the instructional coach, K-5 adjustment coach to 0.5 each, eliminating the dean of student position and reducing the special ed transportation line brings us to a total of $248,771 in reduction over the 3.74% budget increase previously reviewed by school committee. In regards to the additional sheet that was provided to school committee that leaves us steady at a 3.7%, 74%. That takes and continues to leave the reductions that I just discussed. Also puts a line into the budget to cover COVID-related costs that have not previously anticipated, and that takes the reduction of $148,061. Brought us from a 3.74 to the 3.29. By putting that back in, leaves us at a 3.74% budget.
So just a couple of comments on these two budgets. One of the thoughts was, as I outlined in the memo that I wrote regarding the requested new positions, adding the halftime instructional coach at the elementary level allows us to provide more support for distance learning and or some kind of modified schedule and professional development for teachers, just-in-time professional development for teachers. The additional 0.5 social emotional learning coach similarly provides more support for students who will have been away from us for 6 months from school at the elementary level, especially to help support students and families. And the hope is in the following year, we can add the other half to those positions. So it doesn't eliminate them completely, it reduces them by half. If we needed to go below 3.29, we could eliminate those two positions altogether. And I do want to point out that this does still keep the full day K aides moving to full-time. We think, again, students having been away from school for 6 months, preschool students going into kindergarten, and social distancing, particularly students that young, will need all hands on deck for the full day. So we'd like to keep the full day K aides in. And so we're looking for feedback from the committee. The extent of the COVID related expenses is unknown at this point. We've estimated a couple of $100,000 could be for PPE, classroom or site modifications, and substitute costs. One of the things that we're concerned about is that contact tracing will force some people into quarantine, particularly teachers or other support staff members, and then we'll be shorthanded. And so the current budget doesn't have any provisioning for an increase in the substitute line or for PPP or for site modifications. And certainly, we'll address those as best we can should we need to move some budget lines around. But if we were to reduce some positions, reduce our base budget that way and have one-time costs included as an expense increase to bring us back to the 374, we just wanted to show you what that looks like. So I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have about either of those two options or other options that you think might be important to consider.
So, Dr. Evans, I just wanted to add too that I've also shared the town manager's budget with you, just so that all the school committee members, just so you're aware of where the town is falling on their budget, and Senator Lewis and Mike Day also came to the select board last night and talked about the fairly bleak state financial outlook and decrease in revenues, and that they expect the state to be going to a 1/12 budget, and that they don't expect any word yet on the status of the Student Opportunity Act or Chapter 70 funding for next year, probably until July. So that's just the update, sort of a broader financial picture outside of just our budget, but where the state and what the information the town is getting on revenues and outlook as well.
Okay.
So questions from members, discussion.
Well, more of a comment than a question, if you don't mind, Michelle.
Sure.
So I guess I'm sort of trying to summarize what I see as our choices moving forward. Right now we have a budget that we voted of 3.74. We could choose to just stand pat on that and go to town meeting and present that as our recommended budget. We also have an option of voting a different number, as low as the number put forward by FinCom or somewhere in between. So I see that as the first sort of choice, is whether we want to stand pat or move forward. And then the second sort of choice that we have is, when we get to town meeting, do we want to contest the number that FinCom is putting forward, or do we want to present whatever budget we recommend, but not contest the number that they're putting forward? So I see those as the sort of the two choices that we have right now. Stand pat or vote a lower number, and then whether to contest or not when we get to town meeting. And the reason I say that is not that I have a recommendation or an opinion strongly right now, but I do have a strong opinion that the number that's been put forward by FinCom of 2.77 isn't strongly grounded in the revenue or expenses that the town is projecting, as seen by the fact that the town manager isn't recommending that number herself. So all this is a long way of saying I don't know what we should be doing, but I think those are our options. And I think if that number 2.77 were being put forward by the town manager and FinCom and select board, and there was sort of universal opinion from our senators and congressmen that this was the direction that the town should be going, I think I'd be much more comfortable saying, let's just hold pat. Since that's not the case, I think we should keep those other options open. I don't know if that means anything. I think I just sort of talked around, but I just sort of wanted to summarize what I was thinking.
And Brian, I don't disagree, and I think that it's further complicated by the fact that what town meeting is going to look like is still uncertain as well. We do not know yet whether there will be an opportunity for live presentations at town meeting. Right now, we've been told that boards are going to submit written reports, not live presentations for town meeting. But the town is also having discussions, like the state is, about going to a 1/12 budget, since so many of the numbers are uncertain until later this summer. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with a 1/12 budget is. I don't know, Ellen, if you'd want to summarize that for us really quickly so we understand, so everybody understands what we're talking about when we say that, and what that means for our budget in the schools.
So basically what it means is that they take the total budget amount from last year for FY21 and divide it by 12. And then each month we get essentially 1/12. For the school department, that would mean that for the summer, we would have the needed revenue budget dollars to do the purchasing and things that we typically do in the summer. We don't see a big uptick to our expenses until the fall, in terms of that's when teacher payroll starts. The people that are paid from September to June. So our payroll is smaller over the summer, so that would actually, it would be okay for us. But going much into the fall on a 1/12 budget, it would be a little bit more difficult for us.
And Dr. Evans, would we still be able to hire new staff if under a 1/12 budget?
Yes,
Or
we
would
hire.
we have a hiring freeze?
We would be able to hire the new staff that we've identified already, but some of the other additional staff we would hold off on who have not yet been hired. As you know, as I've said in the past, what makes our budget complicated is there are some decisions that we need to make about hiring staff, and we'll have to make cuts elsewhere. So we need X number of elementary classroom teachers. We need enrollment related increases and program continuation increases at the middle and high school. So those staff members, we have retiring staff members and special education mandated hires. And so all of those hires will be retained. If we have an unexpected budget reduction, then the cut comes at the expense side or through layoffs if we had a very deep cut that went into the fall, and or renegotiation of some of the collective bargaining agreements if that's available to us in worst case scenario. So I think that all of the hires that we've made already, regardless of the percentage increase, we would retain. The ones that we have held off hiring are noted in the summary draft that you've seen, and still in play is the additional 0.25 FTE for the kindergarten aides. Those are all existing employees who would have their day lengthened and pay commensurate with that. So, so I don't think it will affect the hiring. I guess what I would encourage the school committee to do is to weigh in on the positions that we've kind of offered up as possible budget reductions and let us know how you feel about that. Because ultimately the school committee makes these determinations, we can make recommendations. So it would be helpful to know where you would like us to hold the line. The other thing that's complicated but also in play is how much we'll be able to retain from FY20 to offset FY21 or FY22 expenses. For example, the CARES Act gives us about a $90,000 grant that we can use in the next fiscal year. We're planning on applying for that in July and using it in FY21. That's a little bit of an offset. And depending on what circuit breaker numbers come in, we can retain less for use in FY22. So there are some places where we could go if the budget provided by the state and the town of Winchester is insufficient to meet our anticipated needs.
So, member comments or questions on I guess it would be on the 3.2 budget. Any of our 3.7.4 gets closer to what our original ask was. So are there any comments or questions on the reductions that Ms. Whitmore and Dr. Evans have identified in that 3.2 budget?
Michelle, would you like me to jump in? Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Go ahead, Chris. I can wait.
So I wanted to second his thoughts on this. My inclination right now is to hold where we are, given the unknowns that are coming out of Beacon Hill, and given that Winchester's local funding is so different than many other communities around us. So what a Winchester struggles with is different than what many other communities, including some of our peer districts, may be struggling with. So to me, I there are too many unknowns right now for us to be having conversations about actually cutting things. It's good to see kind of a menu, which I think is kind of what we asked Dr. Evans for at the last meeting. So I think that for me, Judy, this is very helpful to kind of get my head in that right place. The other piece I just wanted to throw out, and I'm curious what members think about this, is I think both the chair and the vice chair have shared at recent school committee meetings that maybe philosophically the finance committee is interested in finding a way to kind of extend this over just past last spring. And from my point of view, the purpose of the override was to make some much needed investments and program expansions and to bring up to a more sort of level with their peers, things like teacher salaries and other professionals in town, right? So we went and town meeting was very much on board with this. So we made a case that we needed a ride kind of for 3 or 4 specific reasons. And if in fact, what we're doing through some decision making with either with FinCom or proposals that come to the floor of town on a yellow sheet. If it has now been sort of reduced to us to more simply finding a way to continue to operate Winchester without the need for another override, that's a very different construct, right, than what was presented and what was voted. No longer are we saying we're going to make those program improvements. Now, the salary adjustments are very much in the rearview mirror, but given that we made those, the consequence may be we got to freeze hiring at some point, as Michelle was just inquiring about, or maybe do we have rifts down the line, as difficult as that would be to imagine. So I'm rambling here a little bit, but I think what cannot be lost in this, and maybe this, I don't know if this folds into, Michelle, the Article 1 report or some sort of discussion around the budget. I think it's important that the committee and town meeting have an understanding of any budget proposal short of our 374 that we voted. In a sense, is kind of changing what the override is becoming, as opposed to how it was sold. We are just one of many voices in that discussion, but I think that's an important conversation to be having, because I don't want us to be in an even more difficult spot a year or two from now when other asks are being made and there are town meeting members and others who are saying, well, now, wait a minute, you told us, and then fill in the blank. Like, there has to be a reckoning that I think is coming. Does that make sense?
It does, and I do have to say that both Brian and Dr. Evans and I have continued to reiterate to FinCom when we have presented the importance of our asks, how they add value to the district, that these are deferred ads, that these are not that these are ads that we have been waiting for a long time. I know in particular kindergarten aides, we have been talking about full-time aides for the 3 years that I've been on school committee. So it's not, these aren't necessarily things that have come up new to us, but things that we had communicated through the override as deferred needs for the district. So we have continued to reiterate that and continuing to have a public conversation about it, which is what I think I hear you saying, Chris, I think is really important as well.
Michelle, can I step in?
Sure.
So first of all, I'm really concerned. I really appreciate how Brian laid out our options here. And I still feel we are so far away from having anywhere near the information we need to make this decision to change our budget. I'm very concerned about, given our priorities of social emotional well-being of our kids and what has happened this year, I'm very concerned about taking away positions like the Dean of Students. We heard from Dennis how important it was to have one more set of hands on deck for the behavior, the trauma that these kids have experienced, are going to experience. I'm just so worried about taking those opportunities for our kids away. I almost would, and I know we're an education organization, but my concern of their social emotional well-being is greater than even having instructional coaches and curriculum, and because we have such a great district and great teachers and great administrators, I'm not even ready to compare the two, because again, that's a information gap I have, but I don't see any need to be providing that kind of information to anybody, because we are nowhere near deciding these things. And we don't have enough information even on what next year is going to look like. So what we have in place is really what we need. The budget we voted on is absolutely what we need. There is nothing, no fat in that budget. It's just pure need. So for us to kind of shoot ourselves in the foot by taking stuff away now, I don't think that serves our students or their families or our staff.
So I guess my concern is that there actually is a deadline approaching. There will be June 8th town meeting. And if we are only doing written reports for town meeting and what town meeting looks like, there may not be an opportunity to really present alternative budgets and have an open debate as we would if everybody was present in the room. So I think this is a discussion we need to be having, because I think we also bear some risk in going forward with a 374 and FinCom coming forward with a 277, that without the opportunity for being present in a floor debate, if we're that far apart, that we may lose it all. We may lose it. We may only have a 277 budget voted. So I think we need to keep that in our sights as well. I think we'll know more by next Friday of what town meeting is going to look like. So I think we might have another week and a half to think about this, but I do think it's important to be thinking about things like you just brought up, Zena. I know Dr. Evans can speak to the value of the instructional coaches, particularly when we're in remote learning, and why she chose those over the Dean of Students. So I'm going to ask her to do that. But I want to make sure that there are no other questions too. Karen, was there anything before I turn it back to Dr. Evans that you had?
I guess I would just say I also appreciate the choices that Brian had laid out. And I guess I also tend to agree with Zena and with Chris about, I think it's too early, although time is short, to be making or to move off of our 3.74% number. I think it's good to have
Dr. Evans?
Sure, happy to weigh in. So in terms of the instructional coach position, I think that the transition to distance learning has been a sea change for our teachers, and has required rethinking how you structure lessons, how you access software, how you change your grading practices. And so all of the supports that an instructional coach offers are part of that picture, and having additional support there at the elementary level to help the coordinators support our elementary teachers across our 5 elementary schools. We do have a part-time instructional coach at the middle school who we're planning to bring to full-time. She has been a godsend during this transition, and James could probably speak to that. At the high school level, there are directors of departments who also supervise similar content area teachers at the middle school, but having the instructional coach at the elementary level, truly, this is one of those deferred ads. If we had had sufficient funding all along in the district, commensurate with our achievement levels and like communities, we would have an instructional coach at each school, each elementary school, and a social emotional learning coach / adjustment counselor at each school. And so what we were trying to do is over time add more of these positions in a fiscally responsible way. And so in the absence of adding this position, it just will fall on principals and central office to really do a lot of planning in the summer to work with teachers to try to prepare for a number of eventualities in the fall. Instructional coaches are such a great support for their peers. They're non-evaluative positions. They don't supervise. And so they can encourage risk-taking, honest conversations. They can model lessons, and they provide just-in-time professional development, unlike bringing in a big speaker to do a workshop, which may not be convenient, has to be planned way in advance, and may not meet the needs of the people who are in the audience. An instructional coach can differentiate for small groups, larger groups, individuals, in ways that we think are really effective. And so I would recommend retaining at least part of that position, along with at least part of the social emotional learning coach if we can. And certainly, you know, we've got to be realistic. If our budget is reduced, where we would make the cuts, rather than laying other people off and adding these positions, because I think that's what it would take if our budget were to be reduced. I would recommend reducing these positions or not adding them. And I know that the Dean of Students is a position we've asked for a long time, and with over 1,400 students at the high school next year. John and Paula can speak to how your whole day can get sucked up by a single incident. And so what we want to do is provide appropriate levels of support for families and students through the addition of the Dean of Students position. So they're all important. And we've had to make hard choices in the past. And I think that the uncertainty about the FY21 budget is more on the revenue side. And as several school committee members have spoken to, there's still uncertainty about that. And so the finance committee's decision was more of a philosophical one. And as you know, town meeting votes the bottom line on the school department budget. School committee gets to determine how that money is spent. And in changing needs and changing times, we sometimes have to make different decisions. But these are all positions we've asked for, most of them for many years. We're planned through the override, and we'd like to add.
Michelle, can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Dr. Evans, so what I'm hearing from you is that there is consensus amongst staff that there is a greater need for the instructional coaches to help us transition to a possibly longer term distance learning situation, or at least partial distance learning situation, rather than some of the more social, emotional, behavioral supports at this point, that the current staff we have is managing that piece well, so that if push comes to shove on our budget, which I still don't believe we should make any decisions to reduce our ask, but be prepared rather to focus our energies on fighting for the instructional coach piece. Is that what I'm hearing?
So that's an interesting question. I haven't directly asked the teachers about that, but if you frame the question, how much support have you required and will you require to change the way you teach, to have to go remote, or to have to combine distance learning with some in-person learning, or to have to separate your class in two next year and do that? I think they would all say they need a lot of help and have required a lot of help. I think Jen, Ellen, Emma could speak to the critical role that the technology integration specialists have played in this distance learning transition, in how that's kind of a hybrid coaching role to support the use of the appropriate technology in this regard, and how valuable those folks have been, along with the coordinators. I mean, we've been fortunate. Just in the past few years, we've added these science, technology, engineering coordinator and the math last year with Julie McElhaney Gorman, and those positions have been important. The other thing I think that's important about either social emotional learning coaches or instructional coaches is that they work as a team to support needs at the 5 elementary schools, and help ensure consistent and equitable access to high quality instruction or social emotional services in a way that it magnifies their impact, because they can support each other. We have 2 social emotional learning coaches. They both work both with individual students and with teachers. The long-term vision is to have 5 of them at the elementary level, 1 at each school. And I think that is an important vision that we should continue to move towards, which is why I think we should hire a half-time person if we can. I would remind you that we've added a little bit of guidance at the middle school, and we will add a 0.5 guidance and a 0.5 nurse at the high school to support social emotional learning and physical health needs. And so I would retain those regardless of what the percentage increase is, because I think those are such critical positions. And so we are making some strides. But what I would say is trying to choose between an instructional coach and another half social emotional learning coach. They both are critical positions that I would put forth in the budget in the following year in FY22 as full-time positions, if possible, if they're not able to be funded in FY21. Hope that helps.
It does. Thank you.
Sure.
I do think that in addition to the instructional coaches, the adjustment counselors and the social emotional coaches are extremely important, because I think as some of us have alluded to, we can't even really begin to fathom the impact of having the schools shut down and having the students out of school for 6 months, and how some of our youngest children are going to be coming back into school in the fall, hopefully, but will have been out since March. Kindergartners, pre-kindergartners, and up, coming up through elementary school. I just think that adjustment counselors are extremely important as well.
I agree that I think the adjustment counselors are going to be hugely valuable next year. And as well, we heard Ms. Burke at the middle school just at our last committee meeting illustrate the value of instructional coaches, not only in helping teachers transition to remote learning, but increase collaboration. And I think that moving forward, COVID or no COVID remote learning or non-remote learning, if we want to start talking about silver linings and what we've learned and what we've gained from this experience, as hard as that is, I think that the increased collaboration that teachers are able to have by having some key roles and some key staff members be able to bring teams together across the district is only going to not improve instruction for our kids, but just make us a stronger district.
Michelle, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Have you, Brian or Dr. Evans, have you had any engagement with the Finance Committee over the 6 to 10% free cash policy that the Select Board has, and how that range may come into play in budget planning at this town meeting for the next fiscal year?
Go ahead, Brian. Were you trying to say something?
Yes and no. It's been something that's been discussed. I don't think I personally can speak to it right now, other than saying that the goal of any of stretching the override to last for a total of 3 years or perhaps more would be in the third year. It would likely use free cash, and maintaining that free cash at or above the Select Board's guidance level would be part of that. That is to say that we could probably have the override last 4 years or 5 years if we were to burn down through all the free cash. But so that is part of what, to get it to 3 years, is looking at how much free cash do you need to use and still stay above the Select Board's guidelines. But beyond that, I'm not sure I can really speak to that question specifically.
So here's the reason I brought it up, is I want to be sure, as difficult as these conversations are going to be, I can agree with everything Zena said. I can agree with what Karen has said. I can agree with what Judy has said. But just snapping back and forth here online, I'm looking at the 2 budget documents that Judy shared with us. I see about $248,000 delta between these 2 budget options. Does that sound about right, Ellen? Okay, I see Judy nodding her head. So
248,771.
248. So in my mind, here's what I'm just thinking. I mean, I'm just sort of doing some quick math in the back of my head. So just the delta, the value of the delta between 6 and 10% with the size of the operating budget we have in Winchester is like between $3 and $4 million. So just this little delta of, call it $250,000 is a tiny slice, not of the free cash reserve, but of the delta. That is that 6 to 10%. You've got a free cash reserve and it's this big. And then you got a little extra, right? Because it could be 6, could be 7, could be 8, could be 9, could be 10. We're talking about a little slice of this. For what? So for the longest time, we've spoken about the importance, and we get this feedback from bond counsel and from the market, that our very conservative free cash policy lends for a very strong AAA bond rating. We're one of few municipalities who's had that and hangs on to it. But then I just want to really zoom way out and encourage you guys to be having these conversations with the Finance Committee. What is the consequence of the AAA bond rating? Favorable rates. Where have rates gone in the past few weeks? That's question 1. Question 2 is, what major debt exclusion override do we know is coming? It's Lynch, and it's not tomorrow. We're looking for a debt exclusion override. I think that schedule we discussed at the last meeting was like December of 22, right? So and you don't borrow it all right away. So so I woke up this morning and I'm reading all of what's going on Beacon Hill, the Mass Taxpayer Association. If you're not already aware, they're going back and they're kind of rethinking where they think the economy is going to bounce back. They've been giving feedback to our lawmakers on Beacon Hill about how strong 21 is going to be, how strong 22 is going to be, how long this is going to take. And what's clear to all of us is that we're not sure what's going to happen in 21 and 23. We're not sure how quickly things will rebound. But I am concerned that we're gonna possibly make cuts. I mean, let's say reduce the addition, as a finance committee member might say, but on critical things we said we needed that were part of the override cell, and for what? If the consequence is, well, we continue to maintain that 6 to 10%, and it's been very high. It's been close to 10 or even 11% on reserves. There's a value of that, but we have to contrast that with something else. So if that means we maintain a very high level of reserve, and there's a consequence to that in the bond market when we're not doing any major borrowing right now, but it means we're throttling back on needed investment, then that's a value proposition that I can't reconcile. So I hope that, and I'm particularly interested in what Brian thinks about this as our FinCom expat. But I think these are conversations we have to be having, because at the end of the day, the free cash reserve is just that. It's a reserve. It's not somebody's salary.
So, Chris, I can answer that in the out years in FY22 that they expect to dip liberally into free cash to be able to balance the budget if we continue forward, because while we see our delta as a small one, there are expenses on the town side as well that are increasing, and that may require going deeper into the free cash reserve. I was trying to see if I could find the number here from what I sent over from Lisa, then makes FinCom comfortable. So they have even been talking about the need for another operating override in FY22.
So I guess my quick thought to that, I'm sorry, Brian, I do want to know what Brian thinks about this, but if in fact it should come to pass that we don't have an agreement on our operating budget, and there are two different numbers at town meeting, to Brian's opener earlier today, whether we present what we voted in January and just describe why it's all important and let the chips fall where they may, or if in fact we argue for a larger budget. If we do the latter, we have to identify a funding source. If in fact we say it's free cash, then we have to have a consciousness as a committee about the consequence of that. And I think a conversation about the consequence includes us as a committee saying something about the value of having a conservative free cash policy versus the value of some of these much needed investments in education. I think we have to have that frame of mind to have that conversation and to make that argument. And then I'm sorry, Brian, I just stepped on you.
No. Good points. Two thoughts. One, making me sound really conservative with OKC here. It's a lot easier to lose your AAA bond rating than it is to get it back. And I think that's the concern of FinCom. If you could, any given year, you were above your free cash level and all these other metrics were met, you had AAA bond rating, that would be great. If when you lose it, in the next year you get it, you don't just get it back if you've got your free cash back up to where it should be. They look and say, well, you're now a municipality that tends to you view these sort of guidelines as more flexible than firm. So that would be my first thing I would say, is that it's a lot easier to lose it than get it back. To the where it would come from, I'm quite sure, although I'd have to look back at Lisa's spreadsheet as well, that there's still room in the override that could cover what we would need for the next fiscal year. It's the following fiscal year when that would be completely used up and you would have to dip into free cash. I might be mistaken, Michelle, but I see you looking.
No, that's what I remember too, Brian.
Okay, so it could come from free cash. It could come from the excess levy capacity that the override, because one of the things that to me is really frustrating is that we as a school department chose to spread out our asks that were things that were committed to in the override to help stretch the override and to help limit the impact on that levy ceiling in the first year and in the second year. And now, if we could have last year asked for all of these things, and right after the override, we could have got them all too. But we chose to be good stewards of the town and say we'll spread them out. We'll spread out the kindergarten aides over 2 years. We will not ask for the dean of students this year. We'll wait till the following year. And now it's being said, no, you got all the things you were going to get last year, and now we're back to 2.5. So I think that's what's frustrating to me. I sort of answering both your questions and then giving why I'm frustrated with it at the same time.
So I think that our path going forward is going to be challenged by some of the assumptions that we're making as well. And the assumption is that town meeting is going to look like a regular town meeting. And I think we have to be really thoughtful about how we present information going forward with our budget, because while we talk about we're willing to go to fight for our 374 budget on the floor of town meeting, there's not going to be a floor of town meeting this year. So if we're only submitting a written report to town meeting from our department, from the school budget, then that's going to rely on town meeting members reading, digesting, and valuing our budget from that report, and relying on members to do that versus relying on just FinCom's recommendation as well. So I think that we're obviously not voting on this today. This was just for discussion, but I think we will know more by next Friday. I believe we already have a meeting scheduled for next Friday because we have the public hearing, and that we could certainly meet to talk about the budget after that. But I think a lot of what we decide is going to be framed on how we are able to present information to town meeting members.
Michelle, I think that one thing that might be helpful perhaps is to maybe get some clarification around the written report. I'm not sure if that's from Mary Ellen Lannon or from the town moderator, but perhaps just to find out if the written reports are going to be required from all committees in town.
They are.
Or if it's certain committees.
It's everyone, Karen. It was sent to the chair of every committee in town. The requirement for written report.
Michelle, may I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
I'm sort of pushing back on something you said a while ago, which I think comes back now, where you said, if we don't do anything, we could get stuck with the FinCom 2.77% budget. But I see really, even if we do something now, we are likely stuck with the FinCom 2.77 budget if there's no way to debate it or discuss it there. So when I was thinking about that, if we're stuck with no choice and we are going to get 2.77, voting a 3.29 now, saying we're going to negotiate, just means that it means nothing. Because if we're going to get stuck with 2.77, then we might as well go in and say, this is what we need. And if we have no negotiating power, which I don't think we don't. I don't think even with a written, I can't picture any town meeting taking place without a discussion, without a chance for motions, without a chance for, otherwise we don't really have a town meeting. We just have a rubber stamping the finance committee's budget. And I would argue, even as a former finance committee member, that no one on finance committee wants that too. This is a collaborative process.
Especially with the moderator that we have.
I was just saying that it could be a risk. I was trying to just let people know what the risks are that exist. and again, I think that I'm not prepared to vote anything today. That's why it wasn't on for a vote. And I think we'll know more by next Friday what town meeting's going to look like and what we need to prepare for them. I think select board needs to make a decision by next Friday is their deadline. So, you know, I would suggest that unless people have questions about either of Dr. Evans' budget or reductions or which positions the school department values, that we talk again next Friday, when I would expect us to vote a budget, because we'll need to prepare a presentation. So we need to know what presentation to prepare for, Dr. Evans and yourself and myself.
We already have a budget. We voted. It's whether we want to move to reduce
Correct.
our ask, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I agree with Zena 100%. And so you gotta read the committee right now, Michelle. And my sense is we don't have a school committee that has any appetite for backing off what we voted.
Exactly. I agree.
And I do appreciate having been in your shoes. There's a lot of work to get ready for town meeting. So I don't want to discount that. And I realize, especially if you get your written report, there's a lot of work there. But I would encourage you to move forward with the number that we already voted.
I appreciate that, Chris, but I think I would like to, as chair, put it on the agenda when we know more about town meeting or if there's a 1/12 budget next Friday. I think it's important that we will continue to move forward, absolutely, with the budget we have. I think we're in unanimous agreement on that right now. But I think, like everything else right now, information changes frequently, and that I think I would need confirmation of that again when we know more what town meeting will actually look like and what we're doing.
Agreed.
Okay, so that brings us to the next item on our agenda, which would be you, Mr. Nixon, with an update on building projects and facilities.
Let me turn off my mute here. Okay, so Ellen and Judy and I are working on a update. Pardon me, find my notes here. We had previously sent to the MSBA, I want to say a couple of years, it was probably 2 summers ago, an update on growth and development in Winchester. It was kind of a way to keep our SOIs fresh in their minds. I don't think it was last summer we did it, Judy. Maybe we did one last summer and the summer before. There's just always been so many things that are changing here in Winchester, whether it's the large scale 40B that we were all worried about off of Holton Street, and then it goes away, but then something else pops up. So we've, I think, done a pretty good job of kind of staying on their radar. And Ellen and I had a conference call with them, oh gosh, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and their staff expressed an interest in hearing an update from us about what was going on. So we've had a conference call with our town planner, Brian Zakelli, who's walked us through some development. And what I wanted to do just very quickly is I'll summarize it for you. But first, I just wanted to offer the project we were so concerned about off of Holton Street. You remember back when we were voting the master plan, that was around 300 units. I'm looking for Judy or others to nod. It might have been a little over 300. It was around 300, 320. So bear that in mind, because as I go through the list of what's happening in Winchester, it adds up to 342 units. And that number 342 doesn't even include some additional things that are happening. So just very quickly, 654 Main Street, it's a 32 unit development, 10% affordable. Most are 1 bedroom, so we might expect not a huge impact in terms of students, but we are also working on trying to summarize the size of these units and the number of bedrooms. And a concern that the superintendent has raised is how many of these units have a kind of an an offshoot den or study, some sort of space that one might actually use as a bedroom that might be attractive for families with young kids. So we're trying to get some specific information on how these things are actually designed. So anyways, I'll be quick. 654 Main Street, 32 units, 10 Converse, that's 40 to 45 units. 735 Main Street is on appeal. That's 8 units, but looks to move forward. 416 Cambridge Street, this is the one that came out of land court, 96 units. We understand that I think the last time we met as a school committee, it had been approved and green lighted, but we just learned that some abutters have filed their last appeal to the Superior Court. This is really a procedural, this is an appeal on procedural grounds. So not much likelihood that it's going to be overturned. In other words, their case would be made on the fact that land court made some error as a matter of law. That's 96 units. 19 through 35 River Street. This is the big one off of Cross Street. That's 147 units. We've talked about that in the past. That could bring anywhere from 35 to 40 elementary students into our district. We have the Thai. Oh yeah. So then the large Holton Street project did not happen. So Thai Properties has sold land in that area, and it was purchased by Bank Capital with eyes towards a large scale development. So we all know who Bain Capital is, and they got deep pockets and they tend to get things done. So I'm interested and concerned about where that's going to go. We don't have any specific details yet. So just the projects I mentioned add up to 342 units. That doesn't include the development on North Forest Street, where we're expecting 12 to 14 single family homes, 4 to 5 bedrooms each. 3 are under construction right now, more to come. The Elmwood project that we last noted to town meeting, I think a year or two ago, is starting construction. In fact, is complete. Don't know that anybody's moved in yet, but those are 14 units, 2 bedrooms plus dens. And nor did the numbers I just reviewed with you include the Waterfield project that they're in the process of putting together an RFP for, and that would be 50 units. So when you add it all up, there's some significant development ongoing. Mr. Zacchelli's impression is that all of these could come online as quickly as the next 12 to 18 months. Not all at once, but some are further along than others. We would certainly expect to see impact in the next 12 to 18 months. So those are kind of some sobering numbers to us. Maybe not a complete surprise, because if you go back to the master plan that we voted in 2017, we talked about the kind of development that we would see over 10 years. We did our best to describe what would happen in the first 5 versus the second 5. But these kinds of numbers are very much in line with what we had projected. So then what I wanted to ask you all to sort of reconcile for a moment in your minds is that we know from our last meeting, we talked about when a new lynch is likely to open. And that's not going to be before the fall 25. So here we are in May of 20. We don't have space to accommodate this kind of growth. And of course, I didn't mention St. Mary's. I think Michelle just mentioned that a moment ago. Maybe Judy can share with us an update on how many kids we expect to see in our district from the St. Mary's closure, but it could, I think we had the number of students was around 35 Winchester students or at St. Mary's, something on that order. So we might see a significant percentage of those as well. In all but one building in Winchester right now, we're out of space. And so this then drives some more conversation around Parkhurst, central office, future home for central office, and the carriage house. So what I might suggest is that Judy's already been talking about the need for that elevator, which was funded, and the project is underway so that we can get access to the lower level of Parkhurst. But even if we pick up that space at the lower level of Parkhurst, it doesn't meet our space needs moving forward. In other words, we're not going to make it between now and the fall of 25, picking up only the space at the lower level of Parkhurst. So that really is going to drive a bigger conversation about where else, excuse me, we can get space. The master plan really identified 2 places for space. It was the 3rd floor build out at VO, and just to remind you all, we could get about 5 classrooms plus some specialist space if we build out the 3rd floor of VO. Couldn't do that in a year. It's an occupied building. That's a 2-year project with a lot of summer activity. The other option, of course, is the full use of Parkhurst. But to really get the full use of Parkhurst, we have to have a home for central office. So then that circles back to the implication of the carriage house or a new lynch. Certainly central office could be located at a new lynch. That is an eligible expense. It's not reimbursed by the MSBA. But I want the committee to just understand that if that's the scenario that should play out, then we're not moving central office till the summer of 2025. And if that's in fact how this should play out, then where are we going for space? So I think the chair didn't want to get too much into the weeds on the carriage house piece without kind of teeing it up maybe for our next meeting. But this was an opportunity to kind of plant the seed in everyone's mind. You know, we had a pretty detailed conversation about that carriage house a few meetings ago, kind of winding back to 2010, 2012. We have a schematic design exercise already prioritized by the school committee and capital that was funded by town meeting that would do a building evaluation of the carriage house. We would also come out with a space program for central office, which again is something we need. We have to have that regardless of where central office should go, whether it's the carriage house or Lynch. We have to have that space program. I think it's becoming increasingly urgent that we move on this to begin the analysis and then understand if it works or doesn't. Because if it works, we need to know that and figure out what we want to do with that information. If it doesn't work, that's also, you can imagine, critically important. If we were to learn that the carriage house doesn't work for central office, and we also appreciate that we're going to run out of space well before the fall of 2025, then we have to get very creative very quickly. So that's sort of the seed that I wanted to plant. We also talked this past week about Morocco. So I guess there's really two things, Michelle, I was going to hit on today. One was just overall town growth and development, the implications in terms of space and central office. So that's kind of one package. The other is the Morocco school. So you all remember in January and February, we talked about getting some kind of outside expertise to evaluate Morocco, look at the VA, work with DPW and help prioritize for us some like 5 or 6 year needs at Morocco. This idea that because building Lynch first, not Morocco, what are the needs that Morocco has? What's it going to take? I think we all agree as a committee we could easily spend $2, $3, or maybe $4 million at Morocco over the next 3 or 4 years. But how much is it really? And what do we need it for? And how long would it sustain that building? With the idea being that we would completely replace it. So the VFA reports that DPW has put together, just to remind the committee, we've identified, I think it's $17 to $18 million of renewal and replacement needs at Morocco. This committee in the past has acknowledged that we don't have $17 or $18 million to spend. And if we did, we probably wouldn't spend it all because our vision is really about replacing the entire building, right? So our conversations in January and February were about getting some input to help prioritize some needs at Morocco, specifically towards extending the life to a point in time. And the recommendation was that we kind of put that to the side for a little bit, let DPW do some work. So we had some conversation with them just last week, and I might ask Judy to weigh in on this, but the DPW has been working hard with kids outside the building to kind of clean some things up. They've been doing a lot of deep cleaning. They've been doing some, I don't want to minimize, they've done, I think, some nice work in the bathrooms to kind of make the space just frankly nicer for kids and teachers when they return in the fall. And that certainly is appreciated. But that kind of deeper dive, that analysis that we were talking about as a committee has actually not happened. So there may have been some breakdown in communication, but it was a good meeting with Pete and with Jay last week. I think they have a better sense of what it was that we were looking for. And I think, you know, Judy, you were suggesting that maybe we take that work scope that was created and perhaps bring that through the capital process. We'll have a capital conversation starting this summer, really, because it's the kickoff to the capital cycle. I know I've shared with this committee, you know, capital is rethinking what even constitutes a capital project, right? So the threshold typically has been $25,000. That's going to go up. This project, you know, would be somewhere between $25,000 and $40,000. If we do take it through capital, it just means it's going to be somewhat delayed before it gets started. So the unfortunate thing is we sort of lose the year, right? Because we were talking about this in January or February. But I do feel like we need to get going, because whether we need to spend $2 million at Morocco or 3, and whether it's for a roof plus a mechanical system, or a roof plus some envelope component that's failing, or it's 3 things or 4 things, we can't ask for the money until we have a much clearer understanding of what we need and why. And we need to understand it, and we need to put that ask together. And in terms of overall timing, the last point I want to make is just remember our debt exclusion override for Lynch doesn't happen until like December of 22. So the idea being, and of course we have at this coming spring town meeting, a request for $1.5 million for feasibility, right, for Lynch. So we certainly historically, what the committee and administration has done is we've not tried to kind of pile one ask right on top of the other, sort of space them out. And so some time for us to understand what we need and articulate the message, and then figure out how to get that money, is what we need. So I think we need to get the evaluation going. Those are my thoughts, but I've talked a long time. Maybe Judy or Ellen would want to weigh in, especially if I left something out.
No, thanks, Chris. I think you did an excellent job summarizing. We've got a lot of needs related to a long lead time to have enough seats for our students with the pending projects that are, as I've said, at least 400 additional housing units. And then if Holton Street comes on board, that could be as many as 700 additional units, all well before we could possibly do anything at Lynch. We will have some decisions to be made either in January or April of next year related to submission of a statement of interest on Morocco, or submission of an accelerated repair project through MSBA if we choose to go that route. Certainly there are known projects at Morocco that would qualify for that, including work on the roof or windows if that were the choice. I think after having had the conversation with DPW and Chris, that it makes sense to go forward with the request for proposal to have someone take a good look at current conditions at Morocco and reprioritize the capital projects. Those projects will still have to be funded through town meeting, either at fall town meeting or spring town meeting of next year. And so we do have some time. We need to identify a funding source for this project to look at the needs at Morocco. And at this point, I would recommend we go to capital and do that as part of a regular capital process. I think it does 2 important things. One, it reemphasizes that while we are taking a hard look at Morocco in light of the likelihood that it'll continue as a school for the next decade at least, in that we want to invest up front in some of these capital needs and not keep deferring them, but that we also want to take into consideration our other school buildings and town buildings. And that's what the capital planning group does, is look at all the needs and try to make some hard choices for limited funding. And so I think it legitimizes the process to put it forward in a transparent way and say, we would like to take a harder look at Morocco and perhaps invest earlier, because there will be other needs and other repairs that are similar scope to other school buildings in the next few years. And so I would recommend that we move ahead with that. I would not recommend we'd fund it from the regular budget at this point, given the uncertainty about FY21, but if capital could fund it, or we could find some other town meeting funding for it, that would be my recommendation.
Judy, could you clarify, you mean seeking an outside opinion on prioritizing the projects at Morocco / other schools in town, or are you referring to the DPW?
So that's a good question, Karen. And sorry, you were breaking up a little, but I think what you were asking was clarify the recommendation related to Chris's original proposal, which is pretty far down the road, well developed and written, to hire an architect who would work with an engineering contractors to look at the major things that we think need to be done at Morocco, give us some updated cost estimates and some idea of prioritization. That just would apply to Morocco and not the other schools. The DPW does a good job kind of doing a 5-year look ahead, submits things to capital with the school committee's support, And I think there probably are not too many surprises at Morocco, but it's been a number of years since we did the master plan. And if we were to strictly go by the maintenance recommendations, as Chris said, it's, over $10 million of, fairly critical needs. So we really do need to prioritize. We're not going to be able to do all of it. We want to do the things that have an impact on teaching and learning, and that will maintain the investment in the building so that we're not hit with a huge cost unexpectedly, that we do it in a planful manner. And, we're fortunate to have Chris, with his background as an architect, to be able to draft a good proposal that's fairly low cost in the big scheme of things, but that would give us good information that the DPW doesn't have the resources to do in the same fashion. So I would support Chris's recommendation. I think it should go through the capital process and be funded at fall town meeting. And then perhaps in time for recommendation for submission to MSBA as a shovel-ready project in the following cycle.
I think that makes sense. If we also collaborated with Meg at Town Hall to review that RFP, I know that we work in collaboration with her on our projects a lot. So I would also recommend that that we have Meg take a look at it and see just to make sure there's nothing that we've missed. It's always good to have another expert sort of opinion on those. And I will reiterate what I have heard from Capital a lot too, and I'm sure Chris, you can speak to this, is that I know there's an interest from at least some members of Capital to move forward with the projects at Morocco, because we do see replacing Morocco at some point in the near future, and that there has always been an interest in Capital in sort of getting our most use out of the work that we do. So being able to fund those projects sooner rather than later, particularly before something fails, I think there would be an interest in doing at Morocco as well. Are there any other questions?
Can I just offer real quick, Michelle? So Meg has seen the work scope that I wrote up, and she's also shared it with town council, because primarily we want to be sure we didn't have major holes somewhere. So both she and town council are aware of it.
Great, thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment? Chris, that was a great summary of sort of where we are for the next 4 or 5 years in building projects. One of the things that you mentioned was the use of Parkhurst, which is obviously limited by the presence of central office. But we do have flexibility there, thankfully, given that the elevator is going into the Parkhurst, which means potentially I'm talking about in sort of all of a sudden we have 100 kids. What do? The elevator going there would allow us a couple of different options pretty quickly. One would be to move the preschools all around town there. As unpleasant would be, potentially redistrict and then have a way to have 100 kids more evenly throughout the town than just because I don't think 2 classrooms at Lynch necessarily allows us to put 100 kids in Lynch. But these are sort of levers that we can pull before sort of the Lynch comes on board. Because if central office moves to Lynch, you gave a great series of events. We can't get the upper floor of Parkhurst, but we can use the lower level, which has 5 classrooms, 6 classrooms, and use that space for the townwide. So there are, I agree with everything you said, other than that, I think there are levers that we can pull with Parkhurst to alleviate some of the growth we're seeing coming, not all of it, prior to a new Lynch and a new Morocco is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I might ask that, and I'm putting her on the spot, I wouldn't expect Judy to be able to do this right this second, but maybe for an upcoming meeting, we could talk about the space needs that we really need for a preschool. Judy has talked about aside from the actual classrooms, you have other spaces that if vacant, you might think were a classroom, but you need those like, the motor, the OT room and so forth. So I think we only have 4 spaces available downstairs as classrooms, but I think the analysis that just has to be done is we have to look at what do you need for the preschool? we basically have 5 physical preschool classrooms, and 2 of them are now at VO, so 3 are at Lynch. But we are running, I think, Ellen and Judy, it's 9 sections total, right, between the morning, the afternoon, and the all days. Because we have that split program. So the master plan act as we would want to expand that to 6, to go from 5 to 6, but you still have those other large spaces. And of course, you've got some spaces for administrative needs as well, and a nurse and a program director and so forth. So where I thought you were going, Brian, was maybe in the interim, if there was opportunity to utilize space, maybe making the top floor of Parkhurst for kids and finding a way to, pardon the expression, cram administration down to the lower level. I don't know. I mean, that might be a way you pick up net +1, net +2, which would be helpful. But I think when you look at the number, and if you look at the number of units that are going to be coming online, and you have to total from other columns that are in the master plan that just looks at our, what we kind of call our native growth in Winchester, right? The usual turnover of stock, nester, only comes in 1 or 2 young kids. So on top of literally the development that I was reviewing with you all, we have other columns of growth that impact. So if you go back to the master plan, it's pretty clear we're out of style, and we're only going to become more so. But absolutely, I think we're going to have to figure out how to see the Parkhurst turnip pretty hard. Judy, is that something we could do for a future school committee? Is just kind of have a space breakdown on preschool, not for a vote or anything, but just so the school committee can sort of understand what it means.
Sure. The movement of the preschool has staffing cost considerations as well. So yeah, Pam and I can work on that, sort of a look ahead to what our preschool needs will be, whether or not we need to add a 6th classroom or a 7th for an intensive program, et cetera, and what specialized space needs there are in addition to that, and how that lines up. I think it's pretty clear from my recommendations and pushing very, very hard for that elevator to be installed. My strong preference would be not to put students downstairs, but to use the upstairs for students. More light, more natural light, and the adults can adjust to moving downstairs as needed. So, but yeah, we'll look at Parkhurst. We'll look at it as a space need. My suspicion is, based on the 12 to 18 month window for some of these additional classrooms and the opening of the Cambridge Street property, those are VO kids, that we're going to need to relocate not only the preschool, but some other elementary classrooms within 2 to 3 years. And so taking a look at all available classrooms, it gives us more impetus to address a few of the issues at Parkhurst that need to be addressed, whether or not we use it as a preschool. For example, Ellen and I have talked about getting the floors replaced in the school committee room and in the PD room. Those might eventually need to become classrooms. So there's a little bit of a sense of urgency to address that. But the Parkhurst facility as a whole is in pretty good shape, mainly as a result of the insurance settlement that we had for the flood that really did a lot of renovation, and the additional capacity for some electrical upgrades as part of the elevator project. And so we're moving in the right direction. So yes, at a future meeting, we'll be sure to do that. And it is pretty concerning to me about how many housing units are coming on board and what the impact will be on our enrollment. So we do need to do some planning around that.
I might just, one other thought if I can offer, Michelle, is when we did, we looked at different options for the relocation of central office during the master plan. One of the things the master plan told us was that the costs were kind of comparable between relocating at a Lynch versus a carriage house. That had some assumptions in it, things like a timeline. So of course, we're not going to be bidding a new Lynch until I'm going to say winter, or let's say like early spring of 23. So there's an awful lot of construction cost escalation that is sort of unavoidable for Lynch for whatever configuration it winds up with, whether there's central office there or not. One of the realities in partnering with the MSBA, given that they have this more formalized eligibility period, which, you know, consider that they notify you almost 3 months before it even starts, and it's a 270-day period. You kind of either, depending upon your point of view, you're either adding a year to the project or someone's sort of tapping you on the shoulder and next, but you still have to wait a year. If we wanted to, and we had the resources, we could self-fund. If we had the resources, we could have a new Lynch by the fall of 24. I just want people to appreciate that's one of the things, one of the consequences of working with the MSBA through this kind of module process is it inherently slows things down. So, you know, the trade-off is we hope for just really significant and appreciated portion of reimbursement. If it's anything like past projects, it could be between 40 and 43%. But it means fall of 25 instead of fall of 24. If there were a parcel of land somewhere in Winchester sitting vacant and we wanted to build a new central office, just a new central office, we could do it by the fall, no doubt by the fall of 23 and quite possibly by the spring. So I wanted to leave that all with you because as we talk about the need for space, what we can do for central office is somewhat more, let's say, flexible and fungible. I mean, even if we were to discover there's rental space somewhere, the last time we looked, we didn't have rental property suitable for central office. But to Judy's point, these are adults and they can be flexible. But for kids, we need classrooms, and they're expensive to build. We have limited existing resources, and so really our only two options are increased utilization of Parkhurst. And whether we do that in phases once the elevator comes in or not, but we've got Parkhurst, we have a physical plant, and then we've got, you know, the roof of the Vincent Owen School on which we could put 5 classrooms and some support space if we wanted to. But that's going to take, according to the master plan, that could take $5 million. I mean, you could basically build permanent classrooms for about what it costs to get a modular, but you'd have a permanent solution plus some extra support space. So that's really certainly the more valuable decision is to just do the build out of VO as opposed to, we don't even have space for modular classrooms right now, frankly. So anyway, those are really our two options. It's still just VO and it's Parkhurst, unless something drops out of the sky.
Chris, could you just remind me, and maybe this came up earlier, I had missed a little bit of this discussion. How many classrooms are we talking about at Parkhurst if both floors were utilized or if just the lower floor were utilized?
So that's a good question. So I have to go back to I can be accurate plus or minus, I can be accurate within one classroom. So when we used Parkhurst as swing space for the Vincent Owen construction, Karen, we did that for 2 years. We had the old VO was physically a smaller school, and we had my memory is we had 14 sections at Parkhurst in 13 classrooms. So where our kind of front, where the business office is today, when you walk in, the main entrance there on the left, we actually squeezed 2 first grade sections into that space because that's an especially large space. So we had 2 first grade sections in there, and then all the other rooms were classrooms. Or, you know, then we had a cafeteria. We had a library of sorts. We had a music room, just as it was used when it was swing space for Ambrose as well. So anyway, to answer your question, we managed to squeeze in 14 sections, and that was using the 2 modulars as well, one of which is our school committee room.
Okay.
Other questions? So, and again, oh, go ahead, Dina.
I was just going to reiterate something I said along many committee meetings ago, is that I would love to sit down and get a very deep understanding like you have, Chris, because I ask questions like, okay, well, if Lynch has to be built on the current Lynch site, then what do we do with the Lynchies? There's nowhere to shift that many kids. What about Mystic? What about, there are certain pockets of students that I have questions about in terms of where to put them and how safe are the modulars still at Morocco and the ones at Parkhurst. How, there's so many pieces to this puzzle. And I feel like my lack of understanding of some of the opportunities could end up, if this was, Zena's world, would end up costing us more. And so, like the carriage house, it's on school grounds. So it's not like we want just any random thing in that building, but how feasible is it compared to adding more space at VO? So it's just like, we keep having these conversations and they add nuggets, but a comprehensive picture. I would love an opportunity, a workshop, something amongst whoever's interested to kind of talk about all of those spots.
I'd be happy to do whatever I can to bring you and anybody else up to speed that has those questions, and maybe a workshop is a place to do it, Zena. I direct anybody who needs a refresher. If you go back to the master plan, two quick things I do want to underscore. So Zena, the philosophy around the replacement of lynch, which was a key component in the master plan that the school committee voted, was that we would actually build a new lynch directly across from the existing. So to your question, which is where do the lynchies go? They just stay where they are.
Right.
So you build,
I remember
and you can do that because of the size of the site. Now there are consequences to this because, building a new school on, let's say, an occupied site, it's going to take a little more time. You remember from our schedule meeting, we had our current kind of mock-up schedule shows it's going to take a few months longer to build than VO did,
Right.
but it's a bigger building. And with VO, we moved everybody out, we cleared out the site. So some of those questions have been, I don't want to say answered in a way that makes it seem like, other people long ago made those decisions and we don't go back and revisit, because certainly if there was some other solution that required swing space and there was a reason to do it, that kind of thing I think would come up during the feasibility study. But where I thought you were going to go is, but it reminds me, I just want to be sure, a comment you made, Zena, at a meeting a few months ago has not been lost on us. Ellen and I did share with the MSBA that we really want to replace both Lynch and Morocco. There was a reason why we were submitting both SOIs, and that an idea behind leaving the existing Lynch in place was sort of twofold during the master plan. Number one, it saved us the cost of swing space in building a new Lynch, but there was the potential to also leave the existing Lynch standing, and that might be our swing space for a new Morocco. But the conversation that we've had, and we will go back and circle back with them to be sure they understand, we need to do some analysis, and I think it was really prompted by some questions you had, Zena, back in January or February, around what our development options really are for Morocco. Because if in fact a viable option is to build a new Morocco on Leonard Field, and then to tear down the old Morocco, we basically trade, if you will, building for field, then that's something we need to know as a school committee, because that no longer then do we really have a reason to keep the old Lynch standing. Remember, it's important that the old Lynch come down eventually, because it's expensive to abate hazardous materials. It's expensive to take the building down. I can't imagine the MSBA would have any interest in keeping a contract open for 7, 8, 9 years until we were done with Morocco. But also, the old Lynch needs to come down for us to then go back and build the kind of play spaces in front of the building that we have today, right? And the last piece that I will share with the committee, I was just doing some homework over the weekend just to go back and see. So project 10, which is our last flood mitigation project, which is the Morocco culvert. Once that project is complete and we do the remapping, then Leonard Field comes out of the floodplain. So that, as always, water is a barrier to what we want to do in town. So project 10, I think, is only 25% designed right now, but my gosh, by the time Lynch is done, I sure hope all our flood mitigation work is done and we've remapped. So anyway, that might be a really viable option for us, but as you said, maybe we talk about it in a workshop.
I think maybe I misunderstood all the numbers. I've we've been through a lot of this information, the master plan and everything. I was getting a read from the numbers that we're expecting a lot more kids than even the master plan had us expecting. So I must have misunderstood that there's more of an urgency now than there had been even when the master plan was written. Maybe I misunderstood.
So I think what we need to do, Zena, is do a little more work to understand the nature of the bedroom. So we got a good sense of the units. We need to get a little more information on what's the bedroom configuration, right? 1, 2, 3 bedroom. The message we certainly have right now is that when we did the master plan, remember it was sort of in 2 chunks. It was a 5-year and then it was a 10-year. There were some development projects that we knew about that were in the pipeline that are noted. Things like the one on Cambridge Street, 96 units. So that's going to happen. We knew it would, so that was already in our calculus. But I think the point I'm trying to make is we also had the threat of that large development off of Holton Street, right? Over 300 units. So our concern then was if that were to happen, we would just get crushed because we don't have the capacity for that. The good news is it kind of went away. However, all these other projects have come online, and in aggregate, they have even more units than Holton Street did. So from a master plan point of view, we are going to see all of the development we projected and more, just because the numbers I ran through, I got up to 342, and that didn't even include Waterfield, right? Doesn't include North Forest Street. So I might suggest, I think the master plan growth were certainly reasonable. That's why we hired the Donahue Institute, but they might even turn out being a little bit conservative. We might, based on the number of units, I see Judy nodding her head here. So based on the number of units, it appears that we're going to have even more growth than we projected. But the calculus we have to do now is to kind of is to say, okay, units, yes, but what do we know about how those units are configured and what can we expect in the way of students? So that's just a lot of work we have to do, and we're kind of in the data collection stage right now.
Thank you.
So I'm hearing 2 separate things that we need to sort of keep on our agenda or find a way to discuss moving forward. And one of them is really getting a firmer grip on the 40Bs that are coming forward, because at some point we're also going to reach 10% and safe harbor, which may delay or change the progress of some of those 40Bs as well. So I think we need to get a good understanding of what the timelines on the 40Bs are, where the town is in relationship to safe harbor, and in relation to that, what our space program needs are going forward, what we have available and what we project needing. So I see that as one area that we need more information on. To Zena's point, perhaps a workshop or something outside of a typical school committee meeting where we can sort of really dig more deeply into that information, perhaps bring some people from the town on board to that discussion as well, so we can get sort of a holistic understanding of where the town is going with those housing units. But then there's a separate issue that I think I heard from Zena and Chris that relates more to what our feasibility study is going to do, and what our needs are going to be around Lynch and the increase in the student community there, not just in the next few years, but as we move towards a new building at Lynch. And I'm wondering, Dr. Evans, if a lot of those questions about where the Lynchies will go and what kind of space we're going to build will be addressed more clearly through feasibility.
Yes, they will.
So that's something, so all the questions surrounding Lynch are important for us to be thinking about as we build information that we want to gain from feasibility.
Right, and
is that correct?
And the enrollment projections associated with building projects are really important, because the enrollment reports that we have to submit to MSBA that will dictate the eventual approved size of Lynch are due fairly soon. And so a lot of the work we have to do to get our best guess about where we're going with all this development, the impact of safe harbor, and the sort of timing. The safe harbor allows us to defer. It doesn't allow big projects to have a backdoor in, but it doesn't mean they're put off forever. They can certainly find a way to get built. And so I remain concerned that that's not going to be, it may, in a short term help us, but in the long term, all of these students still may come. So my recommendation is that Chris has done an excellent job kind of helping Ellen and me work with preparations for reports that have to go through MSBA. So we'll come back with more information. I would like to just keep on the radar screen that Chris and Ellen are going to work with principals to do an updated floor plan as far as how existing classroom space is being used, and what potential there might be to add or contract a classroom over the next couple of years as we respond to enrollment changes. So we'll come back to you with that. But I think, to Michelle's point, it might be helpful to have sort of, before we submit the next sort of reports for Lynch's project, to have a school committee workshop on facilities, and make sure that everyone has a shared understanding of what the challenges are and what our options are in terms of meeting student needs.
And can I add to, just quickly, Michelle, on the safe harbor piece, which I'm glad you brought, I didn't mention that. I sort of share Judy's caution about safe harbor, because while it's a helpful tool, we should be careful not to prejudge what safe harbor really looks like in the future in Winchester. You know, there may be different philosophies about housing and development than there were 5 years ago, and it could be different than they are today. I was really pleased to hear from Brian Zakelli about the engagement of the Housing Partnership Board. So just because we have safe harbor, I don't want people to understand that that's somehow like a roadblock to future development. There may well be really compelling development opportunities that come in that the town says, we support this, we want to move forward. Even if safe harbor might let us push it off, that might not be kind of the collective consciousness. So it's certainly a good thing to have, because it allows us to have much more control over development. But I sort of share Judy's thought that it doesn't, I'm not going to presume that it's going to stop it. I think it's just going to help shape it into development that we think really reflects our values in Winchester, but that development is just going to continue to happen.
Well, and as I sit on Housing Partnership, I guess that is important to me as well. And that's why I was suggesting that if we're going to move forward with a workshop about these issues, that we include members of the town that might have some information, such as Housing Partnership and Brian Zakelli, in any kind of a meeting about that, because then that could really help us to get a bigger picture, not just of how we see the development impacting the town, but how the town also sees that. So, Dr. Evans, I guess that would leave you and I to try to pull something like that together.
Sure, be happy to help with that.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Then we are going to move on to our elementary handbooks that we have as action items today. Ms. Phelan, are you here to talk about the elementary handbook?
I'm here.
Excellent. You are up. It is your turn.
Great. So the elementary principals worked collectively on this handbook, and I'm just here representing all of us. We had very few iterations for this year, and I indicated them in our elementary handbook changes document. They are from the school nurses. There's an addition, a line that's indicated in red, and a deletion line that they have taken out on a head lice policy, and those were our only changes. Anybody have any questions for elementary?
I just had a question about the notification about pediculosis and why it's being deleted from the handbook.
So that was made by Jen Markham, who is the head of the nurses in town, and I believe that there are just new policies in regard to that we will not be notifying parents when 2 or more cases are identified.
So Andrea, you're saying that's from like public health?
Yes.
And the nurse, Jen Markham is the nurse that is the head of the nurses for the district.
Exactly, and she gave us just that change.
I wonder if Lori Kirby, is she with us? Where's Lori? There we are. You're at the bottom of my grid. Was this a collective bargaining change some time ago? I have a foggy memory that there was some discussion about the role nurses play in this, and that there may have been a change in the collective bargaining agreement.
I don't remember that, Chris. I just really think it's in line with what the state guidelines are around this issue, and they're just following those. And I think we're finally putting it in writing, because I can speak to years ago that this was always an issue. People wanted to know, talk about it. And so now I think they're just making it cool, and how they'll, let people know and when it's appropriate for them to know.
I have sort of a follow-up to that. I don't have any elementary school kids anymore, but I used to remember when you'd get a letter home from the teacher saying there's a lot of colds and flus going around, and make sure your kids wash their hands. That's not in the handbook says we're going to send that home. That just is something the teacher or the principal decides to do, because it seems like a prudent thing to do. Are we, by removing the head lice, are we saying specifically we won't be sending that information home? Or is it more that the teacher might still send home something saying, we've seen a whole bunch of cases of head lice, it's a good idea to check your kids. Is it something that we're now saying we will not do that? Or are we simply giving us the flexibility to not be required to do it by the handbook?
I think this is probably coming from public health, and I think it is, as you said, just the flexibility of that. So, I can speak to Ambrose only in this regard, but our school nurse is excellent about if she feels that there's any concern health-wise for the students, that she will always ask to send something out to parents. So we'll continue with that kind of communication. I just think this provides flexibility.
Excellent, thank you.
Yes, I guess I would just agree. It's nice to have the flexibility. I do think it is helpful and useful to parents to know if head lice, pediculosis cases are occurring in the classroom, just so that parents can be proactive in checking their children. As one who had a daughter encountered this before in early school, pre-K, and then also having heard it crop up in second grade. I do think it's very important. So I appreciated getting notified that I should be diligent about checking, and I suspect other parents might be as well.
And I do know, yes, that the school nurses are very good about at the beginning of the school year reminding parents that that's something you should continuously do throughout the school year. So rather than just when the school nurse informs you, it's something that as a parent you want to have that awareness and make sure you're checking in with your child all the time.
Thank you.
Any other questions about elementary? I think we should take each of these individually. So does anybody have a motion for me for the elementary handbook?
Sure, I'd be delighted. I move that we approve the elementary Winchester Public Schools elementary handbook for the 2021 school year as presented.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We have to roll, I think, or at least raise
Aye
your
for
hand.
Chris.
Aye, Zena.
Aye, Brian.
Aye.
Excellent. And the motion passes. So we will move on to the middle school handbook. Mr. Lynn, thank you, Ms. Phelan. You're welcome to stay with us, or if you have other things to do.
Thank you. I'm going to pop into some classrooms, but thank you for having me today.
Sure. Enjoy. Mr. Lynn.
Excuse me. I'll do my best to talk a little bit about some of the proposed changes, but I do have to apologize ahead of time. If you see me scratching myself a lot, it's not because I have head lice, but all this head lice talk is making me feeling a little itchy. So I apologize ahead of time. So we have three proposed changes in our handbook for next year. The first one is the removal of the language and academic honor roll. The language that it is currently in the handbook, to me, just doesn't really align with our objectives, our goal towards social emotional learning and also performance-based assessment. Our current academic honor roll is purely based on letter grades. And right now, letter grades is also predominantly based on traditional testing. So in my opinion, it doesn't really addresses the whole child. And again, doesn't really align with our goals in terms of social emotional learning and also performance-based assessment. So I'm proposing that we remove that language. In terms of honoring students, currently we are giving awards to honor students based on citizenship and also effort. And those are our Liggins Award and our French Award. And also each team also gives out team awards. And those are based on, again, citizenship, effort, and all those criteria that the district values. Okay, and our second proposed change is under our language on food and beverages. And so we are going to remove the language on the prohibition of chewing gum. Again, this is not an issue at our school. Yes, sometimes we do see kids chew gums, but for most of the time, it is not an issue. So the inclusion of that language in our handbook makes the staff and teachers feel like this is something that needs to be enforced. We are very busy, and I feel like our staff and teachers' time should be focused on dealing with issues that are actually creating problems. And based on what I'm seeing right now, kids chewing gum is certainly not a problem. Certainly, this is not to say that from this point on, everybody gets to do whatever they want with gum, but we wanted the teachers to be able to exercise their best judgment. For example, in band class, in chorus class, you can't sing and you can't play an instrument while you're chewing gums, and the teacher has the discretion to be able to enforce that in their classes. And certainly, if we see kids, using the gums and doing inappropriate things with it, like for example, sticking it on furniture, that's a destruction of property, and we have a language in our handbook about that sort of behavior. So we feel like that is pretty well covered. We also would like to add in a language where it allows the students to have snack during the school day. And this is just to be consistent with our other schools. Students are coming from elementary school and they have the opportunity during the school day to have a chance to have some snacks. And both adults and kids, we can't function well if we're hungry. And thinking about our schedule, especially our 8th grade schedule, they don't have a chance to eat until very well close to 1 o'clock. And so from 8 o'clock to 1 o'clock, nothing in your body, you just can't learn. So we're putting language into our handbook to make sure that our kids' well-being are taken care of so they can learn. And the last is the addition of language with in terms of vaccination. And this is based on our recommendation of Ms. Markham, our lead nurse that Ms. Phelan was talking about. Again, this is not new information. This is just in our review of the handbook, we just realized that this language isn't in our handbook, and the immunization information is in the elementary and also the high school handbook. So we just want to be consistent. Again, the exclusion of this language doesn't mean that now kids or parents can just send kids to school without immunization. Again, this is just really trying to be consistent with the other, our colleagues at the elementary and also at the high school. Okay, and that's it.
Questions for Mr. Lin?
Michelle,
Brian?
I have 2 questions. The first is really easy question. So as far as the change with food and beverage, does that mean that chewing gum is allowed? Or are we saying that that's candy and food still, and we're just not enforcing it the same? If kids sitting in math class and is chewing gum, is that something that they're allowed to do?
Right now, again, like I said, most of the kids are not chewing gum in a manner that I feel like it's inappropriate. And also it is not, majority of the teachers are not going around and saying, hey, open your mouth, are you chewing gum? Because this rule is in place. Basically what we're saying is that we're gonna leave it up to the teacher's judgment. If it's a disruptive behavior, if it's a behavior that is disrespectful, for example, in class, if the kid is pulling out the gums and twirling around, then certainly we will ask the child not to do that anymore. We basically are just saying that we want to give some flexibility to our staff to address this matter in a way that is consistent with what they want to accomplish during the classroom. Right now, this language in there makes it, some of our staff feels like that because it's in there, I have to enforce it, whether the kid is engaging in this behavior in a disruptive or disrespectful manner or not. The kid is just sitting there chewing gum, and he's doing just fine. I say just let him be.
Okay, that's
That
helpful.
answers your question.
So if I were to summarize, respectfully chewing gum is allowed now.
Yes, and I think I would say it has always been allowed.
Okay.
And it just some teachers are confused about whether I want to address that with the kid or not. You are chewing gum respectfully. Again, it's a language in the handbook that says you are not allowed to do that. So I feel compelled to address that. It becomes a relationship issue where I have with the kid. The kid is just fine. Why do I have to go and now address this? And so it takes again that handcuffs off the teachers to feel like, hey, the kid is doing just fine. I don't need to spend time and effort into addressing this issue, which is not a problem to begin with.
Totally makes sense. Thank you. My second question is a little bit more complicated, and it's not something you're changing, but something that's existing in the handbook, which I think is more of an issue I might be addressing at the high school, but it would be the definition of excused absences as is currently listed in the handbook. So I'm looking at the handbook. I pulled up the handbook on the website, and it references for what excused absences are, referencing chapter 76 and 77 of MGL related to the education of the Commonwealth. And then it lists a list of 7 reasons that Mass General Law allows the school to refer to as excused absences. I have had a really hard time digging through Mass General Law 76 and 77, finding that list. I believe that list might be a relic of something that was in an appendix at one point. So this is an observation comment that it might be in there, and it might be you can say you need to look at Article 12 and I missed it. But if it's not, I feel like we shouldn't be saying that it's part of the law, instead saying it's our policy that we allow excused absences for these, and that is consistent with Mass General Law, but not specifically spelled out. And I might have missed it. This is more of an issue of something I have with the high school, so I'm wondering if you have any comment or observation about that.
You're right. I think I will have Paula and also John weigh in on it when it's their turn as well. Looking through that particular law, I don't think it specifically says these are the reason why it's unexcused, but I think looking through the law in the whole, I think it alludes to things like, if a student is, engaged in religious practices or attending religious schools, then they should be excused. So you're right. Looking through the law, to the letter of the law, it doesn't exactly say these are the reason, but I think you can find that through other parts of the attendance law that you can infer that these are something that is appropriate to say will be unexcused.
Okay, so I would suggest that and this is a suggestion, that that section there include referencing chapter 76, although chapter 77 doesn't say a whole lot of anything, chapter 76, and then say something like Winchester Public School or McCall Middle School considers the following to be reasons to allow the absence to be excused. Only because I will be honest, people have reached out to me and said, the law doesn't say that. And we might as well at least have our handbook be accurate. I mean, it does reference the law. It is Chapter 76. It just doesn't say all those things quite so specifically. So that would be my suggestion.
I would agree with Brian on that as well. And I think last year when policy subcommittee reviewed that as well, that was one of the things that we had noted, that the attendance policy in the handbooks didn't reflect the law appropriately. And I think it's appropriate for us to, as a district, to choose the interpretation of that law and to say that that's our interpretation of it. But I have also had people reach out to me about that specific list and it not being directly referenced in the law.
Okay, that makes sense.
2 comments, Michelle?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I also, Mr. Lin, I completely appreciate you revising the section on the honor roll system. Yeah, I've had 2 students go through McCall now and wasn't even aware that an honor roll previously existed. So I'm curious to know if the change in that, if it wasn't being used, if it wasn't being communicated, is this the natural, I heard you talk about the natural progression in the district, but as you've come on as principal at McCall, is this something that you even saw being utilized when you came in?
To be honest with you, I did not know that last year. It wasn't until very close to the end of school year when it was brought to my attention that we are going to be, creating these certificates to honor the students based on these criteria. And so, no, and I think majority of the students, okay, certainly they are very proud of the fact they're receiving an award, certainly throughout the year. That wasn't, at least from my what I understand, that's not what they're striving towards. This is not necessarily a motivator throughout the year. This is what I want to work towards. I certainly, I remember a conversation with the Parent Association as well, just to get a sense of, are the parents aware that this is the award that we'll be giving at the end of the school year? And my sense from my discussion with the MPA co-president so at the time was that most parents were not, did not know that this was going to be something. Certainly, they're happy to receive it, and they're proud of their students that they will be receiving it. But again, it just didn't feel like it's a motivator. But I think the underlying reason why I'm proposing that we remove that is that even if the parents and also the kids know that this is something at the beginning of school year that will be given, and so therefore I'm motivated to put my effort into this, it still doesn't align with what we are trying to teach the students, that it doesn't align with the values. Certainly, I'm not saying that letter grades and achievement in letter grades are not important. I feel like our goal is to honor students, honors the whole child. And this particular way of honoring students leaves out a big group of students that we feel like deserves recognition as well. For example, right now I'm in the process of talking to parents who would like their child to be placed into advanced math courses. And some of them says to me that we understand our child is going to struggle and that our child is not going to get A's in the advanced math course, but we're perfectly fine with that. We want our kids to be challenged. So that type of kid would not be honored here, right? And so I feel like even, again, if the kids are motivated by this award, okay, they're not motivated for the reason that we as a district and as a school want the kids to be motivated for.
So the kinds of awards you're talking about, replacing it with the citizenship and effort, you're talking about making more part of the school culture as well then, so that these are things that students will be aware of and you will sort of work more into the daily rhythms of the classroom and the building culture.
Absolutely. I think as we become more and more in tune, and also ruler becomes more of a practice in our daily way of doing things. One of the things that I can imagine that we do at the beginning of the school year, when we talk about building a charter, building a classroom charter or a team charter, that these sort of recognition is built into that. Okay, we're working towards these goals. These are the values. These are the behaviors that we want to focus on. And so therefore that, we want to recognize for kids who are able to exemplify these values. So absolutely, we will be doing that.
Thank you. Chris, I think you had a question also.
Ask for a quick clarification.
Go ahead, Karen, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just so the certificates that you were just mentioning that had come up at the end of last year, that this is more, they are more around citizenship or considering the whole student, whole child, and it's not the same as honor roll.
Correct. So at least last year, and I'm confidently saying even before me coming in, at least for 2 years prior to me coming in, that at the end of 8th grade, at the end of 8th grade, 2 major awards are being given, which is the French Award and also the Liggins Award, and those are citizenship awards. And prior to the ceremony, we have an assembly, and at that time, the team award. So 2 students from each team are giving awards, and that's purely based on citizenship, were also given. And under that, about, I would say, a quarter to a third of the 8th grade class will also receive this honor roll award. My experience from last year in doing the assembly was that majority of students were quite surprised. Oh, I'm getting an award. I didn't know that I was getting this award. And other students receive the awards and go, what is this for? And so there's that piece as well that, clarification of what this is about. But at the end of the day, like I said before, that, the rationale for giving this award is just not aligned with, what the district is trying to accomplish.
Chris?
So I was having a flashback when we were discussing the food and beverage piece to my high school Spanish teacher, Ms. Newland, who was in a school where chewing gum was not permitted. And on the very first day of class, she was everybody's hero. She said, here's my rule. If I can see it, hear it, or smell it, it's in the trash can. And so everybody loved going to Ms. Newland's class and playing by her rules. I wonder if, so I appreciate why you want to strike this, but I do wonder about the few instances where, and again, flashing back, if it becomes a distraction in the classroom, giving teachers the kind of space they need to say, get rid of it, it goes in the trash. Would Mr. Lin, would you be open to just a revised line that says chewing gum will not be permitted if it becomes a distraction in the classroom, just so that teachers have the place and space to make that call in the occasion that it does become a distraction?
Yes, I just feel like that might not be necessary because elsewhere in the handbook, it's pretty clear that being a distraction and engaging any behavior that is disrespectful or causes educational process not to go forth, is not permitted. And I would say that I'm open to putting that language as you indicated in there, but I feel like it's already being covered by our disciplinary code anyway. So
Okay.
like I said, it might feel redundant, but if the committee feels like this is something that's important, I have no problem putting that in there as well.
Well, I certainly don't want to be redundant. I just want to be sure we're being clear about the context within which chewing gum is okay.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, my time here, chewing gum has, never been an issue. There was no students that's ever referred for disciplinary action to the admin for chewing gum. Okay, nor has teachers have come to me and said this is an issue. I think the complaints that they have is that I feel compelled to have to enforce this rule when the kids are doing just fine with with chewing gum or not chewing gum. And so therefore, I feel I'm put in a very awkward position to have to enforce this rule because it is in place when the kids are just doing just fine.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, Brian, would you like to make the motion for the middle school handbook with the change that you suggested?
I would move that we approve the McCall Middle School Handbook with the amendment that the language around excused absences is revised in such a way that it is clear that those 7 enumerated reasons are not specifically from Chapter 76 of MGL. I would leave that wordsmithing. I'm totally okay with leaving that wordsmithing to Mr. Lin.
Do I hear a second?
I second it.
All in favor? I think, can we raise hands? Can Frida see hands?
Can I just ask, so Mr. Lin, are you're really clear on what Brian is looking for there in
Yep.
that motion? Okay,
Yes.
I'll say aye.
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 Aye. Okay. And with that, we'll move on to the high school handbooks. I believe Ms. Konis and Mr. Dupuis are here to present those.
Everybody, thanks for having us today and
everybody.
inviting us. We're a duo, a tandem here with Paula and I. So Paula, thanks for speaking about the end of the year celebrations already that we're optimistic about for the high school. So for the high school, I shared a separate document with just the updated changes for this year. And I'll go in order from that. The first change or update that we have is per the health office from Jen Markham. It sounds like she's making her some updates throughout all the handbooks, which is great. And that just adjusts some wording, some updated immunization protocols, and adding some language about concussions and providing medical notes. She also did put in some language in there that parents are encouraged to meet and work with the school nurses collaboratively about medical needs. The second to highlight is around attendance, and per the discussion with James, Brian, I see that you're on the shared document with me right now. I already went down and changed some wording about the law and what we consider as excused absence and highlighted in yellow. So if you see that, we can talk about that afterwards. But under our attendance, we wanted to make sure we're aligning our language more towards the McCall language, or in alignment with the McCall language. And Paula and I did that in collaboration with James yesterday. And also we want to, Paula and I, due to the fact that we spend quite a few amount of man hours working with students around attendance, more of an emphasis on working with families and students collaboratively and involving our support staff, adjustment counselors, special ed liaisons, nurses, and guidance counselors. And then thirdly, about parking, Sergeant Paranick, our school resource officer, worked in collaboration with the chief of police, and they put more specific language about which side streets are not permitted for student parking. I'm looking through it right now, sorry. And also some language about the charging stations that are there with the updates at the high school a few years back, about some protocols of what's appropriate amount of time to use the charging stations. We do end up having some neighbors who use it and park there overnight and use the charging station. So I think they wanted to add some language in there for people who overuse it for their own personal needs. So I think that's it for now. Paula and I happy to take any questions.
Any questions for the high school handbook?
So, I do,
Brian.
Michelle, may I? I guess, John, if you're taking the lead on this, could you explain to the committee what the N rule is and how it's used in the handbook and how it's used in the school? How it's explained in the handbook and how it's used in the school?
Sure, I smile, and this is why we're doing this in tandem, because Paula has the past experience, and it's something, I had that almost same exact question, Brian, when I came over to the high school. So I don't mean to pass the mic to Paula, but I'm passing the mic to Paula.
So the N rule, and I will state that it has undergone some changes in the past 4 years since Dennis and I have joined WHS. The N rule is, and I comes from the idea that if a student has too many unexcused, and when I say unexcused absences from classes, I really mean cuts from class, where a kid is in first and second period, they've gone to Spanish, they've gone to science, and then all of a sudden they don't appear in math third period, and then they go to French and they go to chorus at the end of the day. So the kid was in school, was marked present for school, but they were marked absent for French class and not, or rather math class, and not dismissed from school for an approved reason. The N rule says that if a student has so many numbers of those sorts of missed classes that they can stand to lose part to full credit for that class, depending on how many times they've missed classes, how many quarters of the year they've reached that threshold of cut classes, to use a simplified term to describe it. And we don't really, I will say that anecdotally, we don't use the N rule a whole lot, because what we try and do well before we get to the point of having to reduce credit for a student is we have meetings with the student, the teacher, the guidance counselor, as John said, any other support services, support staff who might be working with that student. We bring in the parent, we bring in Sergeant Perenick, just to talk about the truancy and the law behind the importance of school attendance. So we really try and put in a number of supports and a number of processes in place. And then only if the student continues to miss classes or miss school without any reasoning behind why the student is missing school, that's when we might look to, as we call it, invoke the N rule and potentially reduce credit for a student. So they would still earn the grade in a course, but instead of the course earning the student 5 credits, which most of our full year academic courses do, the student might lose a quarter of the credit for that class, so 1.25 credits. Does that help answer the question?
That does. It of course has a couple of more follow-up questions, if you don't mind. You said it's not used frequently.
Mm-hmm.
That is, it's not invoked frequently. Maybe it's used all the time, as if you're not careful, you'll get the N rule, but it's not invoked frequently. Is it invoked frequently enough that we need it?
That's a great question. We asked ourselves the same question a couple of times throughout the year, and I say us, I say Paula, Dennis, and myself. We would like to put together a handbook committee to take a deep dive into our high school handbook when we return in the fall, depending on what that looks like. We'd still like to put a committee together to look at things like the N rule and its need and its effectiveness. I think what Paula put it very well. We're feet on the ground, knocking on doors well before a kid gets to an N rule situation. It's used as more of like a red flag kind of, hey, this could happen, but does it happen with fidelity? I would say no.
Okay. So I know you're both aware that the policy subcommittee met in the fall, and one of the things that the policy subcommittee came forward to the whole committee was several recommendations. One which seems to have been addressed, which now after this conversation, which is the referencing of the outdated Mass General Law. That was just a matter of might as well have the right law and have the right reference. The second was that the handbooks differ between the middle and high school, and there was an opinion of the subcommittee that they should be more aligned, not aligned relative to your audience. But further from that was that consequences for absences should avoid punitive impact on students' grades. And where I now, as a member of the committee, have a hard time is understanding how the N rule, how it's okay if a student, I understand we need to have our students attend class, and if they don't, we should have a myriad of options at our disposal, including after school system. I mean, you could come up with a number of things you could do. You can't do athletics, you can't do something else, but it's the punitive impact on their grades and their credit that I think was troubling to the subcommittee, which is why the subcommittee went to that length, because the third recommendation was this really is something we'd like to see stay in the handbook if we can, but we'd like to have it as long as it's consistent with Mass General Law. We don't want to see students' grades and credit impacted because, and the rationale behind this was you could have a student who finds themselves too far behind to ever dig out of. And that was why we made those recommendations at the time. And I think the end rule, if it's not used enough to be useful, I think it sort of goes against what we were intending, but maybe it could be modified. I'm just throwing that out there. And I see several hands, so I'm gonna stop talking.
Well, and I want to follow up because I was the other member of the policy subcommittee that brought those recommendations to school committee. And so I was surprised to still see the end rule in the handbook this year without any changes. But John, what I did hear you say is that, and Paula, is that you're looking to form a committee for next year to sort of review some of these attendance policies and look to change them going forward, which I find encouraging. I would also encourage you to include students on that to the greatest extent possible, because I think one of the other things that informed our policy decision on that was that the high school is making a lot of efforts to sort of reduce social emotional anxiety for students. And I think that this particular policy, we as the policy subcommittee had heard from a number of students at the high school that for students who aren't having the level of attendance issues that Paula spoke of, it's causing a lot of anxiety, particularly for seniors in their senior year. And not for, again, students with the kind of attendance that Paula described, but for more typically attending students, because it feels like a threat of loss of credit or loss of a grade hanging over their head. Zena,
So
you had something.
Jen, do you want to jump in first, or can I make?
No, go right ahead.
I think this is a philosophical difference of opinions between me and maybe the policy subcommittee, but this seems to me to be an issue of safety. The children, they're still children. They have to be accountable for their attendance and what they're responsible for. And I feel like the educators, and I'm not an educator, so I can't speak to child development and what's appropriate for teenagers, but I feel like we need to give them the time to reflect on this in their professional capacity. And I don't see this really as a policy question. I see it more as an child development, child well-being issue. So I'm not really sure if that's something that the school committee should really delve into before the high school subcommittee has had a chance to look at it.
I think, Zena, if I could jump in, I know that's, again, the end rule is, I think I probably asked Paula maybe 3 or 4 times this year to re-explain it to me and I always try to view things from the student's perspective and listen as a student or as a parent, to really respect and empathize where they're coming from when there's some sort of struggle. And I think that's at this specific part, and I is at the forefront of why we want to put together a group of students and educators to really look at our handbook and find out what's the best fit for our students and staff. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
And I think, Zena, that's also why the policy subcommittee didn't rewrite it for them. The recommendation came out in the fall and was sent back to the high school and the middle school administrations for them to take a look at it as well. Our recommendations were only around the type of policy we'd like to see, not the specifics of it, because we do vote, as Chris has mentioned before, handbooks are policy because we do vote them. So they are
overall we vote them. Yeah.
An extension of, right, but they are an extension of school committee policy. So, and again, that's why we allow the educators the space to rewrite them.
If I may add, just though, Zena, that it actually in the handbook says and rule policy. It actually uses the word policy right there.
I think they mean procedure. I think it's a verb. It's like splitting hairs on the word. I think it's a procedure, a process. I don't think they technically mean policy. I think that's a more overarching state, word for the way our district runs.
And can I just weigh in? So when Michelle's right, I've mentioned this before, but all I'm really doing is sharing what school committee council, both present and past, has shared, which is when we vote handbooks, we are basically creating policy, whether we call it that or not. Can I just ask a question? And by the way, I like Zena's point about, sort of mindfulness about where kids are. There is an important custodial function of schools, and particularly if Winchester High School should go on to become an even more open campus like the one I went to, where I can't remember what the rule was for freshmen, but I know for sophomores, I got in my truck and I drove and I went somewhere for lunch. So, who knows how open Winchester will be, years from now. So maybe Zena's point might even be more important then. I just have a question about process. So the policy subcommittee memo, Brian, that you and Michelle mentioned too in the fall, where you were flagging this as a question, my memory is not as good as it used to be. Did that come to the school committee, or was that something you sent to the principals?
So at the time, we and actually it's in our folder too, for the meeting folder. It was added late. It was a memo that was prepared and presented to school committee on the October 3rd school committee, I believe, or thereabouts, with our recommendations. And they were at the time shared with the principals as well, or shortly thereafter. So they were presented to school committee. And there were other parts of that policy subcommittee meeting had other issues at hand, placement of a plaque at the high school, other issues that maybe at the time, but the memo is in the current meeting folder if you want to take a look at it.
And okay, so I will. I'm going to go back and take a look at it because I don't remember much discussion around it. But if there's a memo there, I look forward to going back to reading it. And I just want to circle back and suggest that more conversations warranted. But my memory is, I think one of Dennis Mahoney's first engagements with the school committee after he became principal was on the enroll. So Paul is right; it has gone through some change. And I think Dennis. He took on a lot in his first year and did a lot of homework. So he's certainly been a part of the conversation when there have been changes in the past that Paula mentioned. So it'd be good to have him be a part of it as well, just so we're all on the same page. He has some context that he's had to go digging for, but he's got some good stuff.
Anyone else?
If I know Jen, you want to go, but if I can just make one request, I'm not really sure that handbooks, I wonder if we've gotten a legal opinion on whether handbooks should actually be voted by school committee, or if they are just part of the procedures that administration takes care of. And I'm wondering if we can't have that be a topic of a letter, an email or something. I'll leave it at that, but I know Jen wanted to talk, so sorry, Jen.
It's okay. I just want to give a little history that predates John and Paula. So when I first came, there were a lot of things that were shifting around how attendance could affect grades, as well as we had a different student management system then that made attendance, according to the teachers, more cumbersome than it is now. So there was a lot of history and emotions. So as we all know how important those are, really tied to this topic. So I just want to advocate for them to really be able to take this back to the staff, because now when we look at it 7 years later, you know, it may have outlived its time and it may not make sense that we do that anymore, but there's a lot of emotional tie-ins to the high school that went through some big shifts about 6 years ago with this. So I think forming the group and talking with people will be important in being responsive to how people feel about it, not so much the logistics of it. So my 2 cents.
I would agree, Jen. Paula?
Yeah, if I can just come back and echo Jen's sentiment there. We have done some work. We have, I want to say 2 years ago, it might be 3 years ago. My timing isn't perfect. We did have a teacher committee sit down and rework some of the language in the N rule, as you say, procedure. It is, as Jen has said, something that does have a lot of emotion tied to it. There are teachers in the building who feel very strongly about it. But we have made steps to modify it from 4 years ago when I arrived to where it is now. And I think those steps put us in a good position so that when John and I do sit down with a handbook committee or sit on screens with a handbooks committee in September, we have some sort of groundwork that we've laid that we can have further discussions about the N rule and what it looks like and how it functions and its usefulness at the high school.
Well, and I'm encouraged to hear you, John, say that students will be included in that as well, because I think it's important to understand how not only the staff feels emotionally about it, but the students do as well. Is that something you expect to tackle through a separate committee or through school council?
I think the conversation we had informally was a separate committee. Yeah.
I would just give some a reminder to some of the things that were going on when the subcommittee actually met to discuss this back in the fall. One of many events was a global environmental children's summit, walkout, whatever you want to call it. And I think we all agreed, well, I agreed that I didn't think that there was any, me personally, didn't think there was any place in the school handbook to allow students to leave school and call it excused. However, I think that part of what that informed was whether what would be the consequences of having someone have an unexcused absence. And I think that was something that at least helped shape that conversation. I don't know if that helps you, Chris, remember when we were talking about this. I don't know if you remember that. This was where a lot of this came out of that. That was in September, maybe October, I can't remember. I really do appreciate a handbook committee coming together to look at this and other things in the handbook. The flip side of that is this was a conversation that happened in October. So shame on me for not following up more, but it sort of feels like it's quite a bit removed from when we had this conversation and when we made these recommendations. And I guess I'm a little disappointed it's not further along looking at some of these changes.
If I can just add, we did not have consensus at the time. I was debating it, and given all that's been happening in our district, I'm not sure that that's fair to the staff to have expected this rule to have been fixed. I know you don't think it's a short enough period of time. It's not a short period, but I'm thinking with all that they have on their plate, given our budgetary constraints and how little administrative staff we have, I think them asking for more time is quite legitimate.
So if I could just, in the interest of time, and I know you've all been sitting here for a long time and people are getting tired and probably need a bio break. What I think John is suggesting is taking another look in the fall at a couple of things in the handbook. There's no reason that we have to wait till next spring to revisit that. So if Brian and Michelle feel that the policy subcommittee's recommendations weren't adequately addressed in this version of the handbook, then we could come back with a recommendation for a change sometime in the fall after John has a chance to meet with students. Doesn't have to wait till another handbook iteration, and then the full school committee can weigh in on that.
And I think, when you do start a committee to look at a handbook, you take those recommendations and put them at the forefront, and that guides the conversation, and then keep you in the loop as well, because obviously you put so much time and effort into it. I think it would be healthy for us to have a conversation going, Brian, as the committee goes, just to inform you, or just to, make you aware as to where we are, so we don't have the same, mishap or the same miscommunication next year, which we wouldn't want to have. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
I like the idea of being able to circle back earlier or at some point in the fall and addressing this again as need be.
So, John,
because I guess I do understand that. I remember the discussion about from the subcommittee policy, or from the subcommittee on policy from last October. I remember this being a topic that had come up. But then I guess also to Zina's point, there has been a lot since March, and school councils do typically, I believe, go through the handbook policy changes with the administration before it comes back up to school committee. And I vaguely recall from middle school that that discussion typically occurred in somewhere between January to March. So if it was March, then I can totally understand where this gap has come in from. But I do like the idea of being able to circle back in the fall and revote the handbook as necessary, if I'm understanding that correctly.
So what I would suggest is that John and Paula, is that as the handbook committee meets going forward in the fall, hoping that we can continue to do that either in person or remotely, that maybe perhaps the next time to visit us would be with a draft of what that new policy would be, and to be able to describe the progress and effort that you've made at the high school to that point. Because to answer Dina's earlier question, MASC does direct us that policy as defined for the school committee includes everything, including strategic plans, district goals, student handbooks, and the budget, and we are required to vote those because they are part of our policy. So if you could just keep us in the loop as you guys make progress, we'd appreciate that.
Thanks, Michelle. It's already on the to-do list right here.
Yep, absolutely.
Is there somebody prepared to make a motion then for us on the high school handbook?
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion, but I'd like to just ask one quick operational question, but I'm still going to make the motion. Given that so many pediatricians' offices are closed right now, obviously because of COVID, I'm assuming, John and Paula, that the nurses are going to be a little flexible with families when we're saying you need to come in with updated physicals or immunization. I mean, we have kids who really should be getting shots and they're not because their physicals have been canceled because they're just not sick. So I'm assuming we're going to have a little bit of flexibility in the fall, and we'll know more in September just what the backlog is like, but it's huge and it's getting bigger.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. So I'm happy to move that we approve the WHS handbook as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Karen and Brian?
I'm sorry, I'm just wondering if the handbook is approved as presented, but with the
Mass General Law change. Yeah, it should be with the Mass
Yes.
General Law.
and also revisiting this in the fall.
That would be sort of for a future handbook, right? I'll withdraw the motion if somebody wants to make one that more specifically references the change in Mass General Law.
Brian, you did the last one. Are you prepared to do this one?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't have the
I'm
language.
sorry,
I'm
I
happy
just
to
don't-
do it, but I don't have the Mass General language in front of me. I'm
So-
on my phone.
Yeah.
Same
So
here.
Judy, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. If I could jump in here, I think we're really getting in the weeds on this.
Right.
A wording change to reference a law that's outdated is just that's just a clerical thing. So my suggestion would be that the motion say something like approve the handbook as presented, with the understanding that further revisions to the attendance policy will be presented in the fall.
I make that motion. So moved.
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor? Chris? I
Aye.
got Chris.
Aye. Sorry,
Tina?
that was me. Aye.
Yep, I got you.
I will abstain.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so that brings us forward to open enrollment. Dr. Evan, can you run us through that very quickly?
Sure, I'd be glad to. And thank you, John and Paula, if you want to jump off. I appreciate it. This is really an elementary issue. So every year,
Thank you.
thank you. Every year, what we try to do with open enrollment is to equalize class size across the district or encourage parents, if they're able to transport their students, to move to another school with the understanding that they'll stay there for the duration of their elementary experience. What I do is try to not add more seats than would move the average class size up. And so generally, I suggest 1 to 3 seats, depending on how far below the district average a certain class size is projected to be at a grade level in an elementary school. So the open enrollment recommendations that I put forward for Ambrose to take 2 or 3 students in grades K, 2, and 3. At Lincoln School, take 2 or 3 in grades 2, 4, and 5. At Lynch School, take none because I think they're all going to be full. At Morocco School, kindergarten only. I think the rest will be full, either 2 or 3 students. And VO, only 1 or 2 at grade 2. VO is projected to be full as well. So the reality is, I'll put this, if you approve this, I'll put this out to the district. There'll be an application. Parents may consider applying. They may have siblings. Unless there's an open slot, there's no place for siblings. So in the past, this has only yielded us 1 or 2 or 3 students total moving. I'd also like to caution us that there are a fairly large number of students who are remaining at their current elementary school for the fall, even though their parents have moved to another location in town. And in general terms, I approve those if it's in the best interest of the student for a variety of factors. But many times I ask them to move to the new school because there simply isn't space at the existing school. In this case, I'm approving all of those requests because I think it's too disruptive to ask students to move schools after they've been away from school and given the uncertainties in the fall. So these are fairly conservative numbers. I expect it'll only yield a handful of students, if any, who might want to move. But I would like to encourage movement to the Ambrose Kindergarten and the Morocco School Kindergarten, and the rest, 1 to 3 students, there might be space available. You're probably going to ask, what is going to be the impact of the St. Mary's School, and has that changed our projections from April when I gave you the overall projections? And right now, a fairly small number of St. Mary's School students, 10 or 12 students, have enrolled in the district. Some of those are kindergarten students, and we have space in kindergarten at most schools. And so has not been a large influx. The St. Mary's principal has told me that families are really struggling with this decision about where to enroll their students. Right now on the list, we have about a couple of dozen students from grades 1 to 5 who are moving to town or returning to us from private schools. Pretty well spread out throughout the district, pretty typical number. What we don't have are the move outs because I don't know yet who's moving at the end of the school year. And so that could counterbalance some of those. Right now we've got about 10 known students coming into McCall, and about half that number known students coming to the high school. The high school students tend to let us know later because when you move a high school student, it is has been unusual in the past, but a growing number of folks have moved to town for middle and high school. So, and some of these people already live in town and are coming back from private schools. So my bottom line is I'd like you to give me permission to open up slots as indicated and put out the applications to the community to see if there's any interest in anyone moving so that we can equalize class sizes across the district, and be happy to take any questions.
Judy, what's your, you typically you ask parents to make a decision by some date in, is it the end of June, or what's your hard stop for this?
Yeah, I definitely ask them to make it by the middle of June. In the past, we have some years we have not opened any seats because it's been fairly even to start with. In the years where we've opened it up, I've put out the application in late May and asked people to let me know right away so that you know, we have a better idea as we close the school year to be sure that the class sizes are equal. So I'm asking for a pretty quick turnaround from parents on this one if they want to make a move.
So I'm happy to make a motion, Michelle, if there are no questions.
I think Brian had a question.
Can I ask a simple question? Do you find that the parents who take advantage of this tend to, is kindergarten the most common age where people will take advantage of this, for example? Would that be fair?
Yeah, surprisingly, no. I think sometimes families with multiple children, if they see an opportunity. So if I have a 2nd and 3rd grade open in Ambrose, we might see 2 siblings doing that. Kindergarten would only be if the child's an only child. People typically don't have older children in one school and then choose a different school for a kindergartner. So no, surprisingly not. I've had very few people move for kindergarten. In fact, I've had very few people move at all. And so some of it is a function of where they work or their childcare, and they want to switch schools because the school is closer to their workplace or on their way to work or something like that. And you know, a lot of our schools, folks live in one part of a district that's even very close to a different school where the child could walk. And so, you know, with 5 neighborhood elementary schools, there are a lot of reasons why people might want to shift. Yeah. But there's no one school that is a draw. All of our elementary schools have fairly similar achievement levels as measured by MCAS scores. And so people like and are deeply committed to their own neighborhood elementary schools. And so we don't get a lot of folks who want to move.
Okay, so my quick follow-up to that only is that kindergarten, I thought maybe the answer was going to be it was more common in kindergarten, but kindergarten is also where you have the most variability in how many students you're going to have coming. And I saw you shared with us again the April enrollment projections, and I see where you come up with Morocco and Ambrose. But how confident are you that Morocco and Ambrose have that space and that Lincoln, Lynch, and VO don't? How firm are those numbers such that because the other grades, you know who's here, sort of in a manner speaking, but in kindergarten you don't. How confident are you in them?
So it's a great question. It's a rough year to project because there may be some folks who keep their kindergartners out an additional year because of uncertainty. But the numbers that you got in April were based on real kids on a list, most of whom we've had verification that they're coming, but a number of students who are undecided, and then a few extra slots. And so I'm very confident Ambrose at 3 sections, given the students I have known on the list, can take K, and the same thing for Morocco.
Okay.
Unless there are a lot of wins in the summer, I think we'll be in good shape.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then I think we're ready for a motion, Chris.
I move that the school committee authorize the superintendent to offer open enrollment for next school year 2020 through 2021 as presented in the May 14th memo.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, the next thing we have is the minutes. You receive them ahead of time. If nobody has any outstanding questions about the minutes, then we could take both of those as a.
So Michelle, I had a couple of comments on one of them. The one on May 5th, I reviewed and it looked great, but there were a couple of changes I wanted to make to the ones on April 30th.
Chris,
Shall I start there?
Well,
one of them is substantial.
If it's substantial, I would suggest that we just put the minutes off till the next meeting because it's going to be hard for people to verbally hear those versus being able to read them in writing. So if we could just approve the May minutes and then we'll just hold off on the April 30 minutes till our next meeting.
Okay, I'm happy to make a motion. We approve the minutes of May 5th as presented.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, and then Chris, if you could just get those changes to Frida, who can get them out to all the members, that would be great. I'm going to make this quick. I know it's been a long meeting, and I know there are meetings waiting behind us. So I just wanted to let you all know that the governor has convened a return to school working group that is made up of teachers, administrators, MASC, public health and safety, MPTA, students, transportation, and they are meeting to make recommendations on summer programming and fall restart and recovery. They'll be sharing information, I am certain, with superintendents and on the DESE website, and will present both a draft plan and then a final plan. Senator Lewis and Senator Peisch held a virtual hearing on remote learning for the education subcommittee, where we heard from experiences across the state. Budgets, access to technology and internet, and mental health seem to be the #1 concerns of both parents and administrators across the state. It was sobering to hear many of our Western school district partners don't even have the internet access to do anywhere near the kind of remote learning that we're able to accomplish here in Winchester. Many of the districts are delivering paper packets to their kids weekly throughout the district. So if you have a moment and you're interested in what's going on statewide, it is recorded and it's a good thing to listen to. The Winchester Sports Foundation and First House are collaborating to do a fundraiser for the Sports Foundation through a Memorial Day barbecue takeout order. If you're interested in supporting Sports Foundation, that would be a good thing to check out. WinPAC has office hours via Zoom Wednesday evening at 7:30. You can find information on the Google group or the WinPAC Facebook page for accessing that Zoom. That is all I believe that I have for now. Brian and I will continue to work on preparing whatever form of presentation we need to do for town meeting. The only other thing I would ask that we come to consensus on as a committee would be that I would like to ask Chris to prepare the report for town meeting on lynch feasibility, if that's okay with you, Chris.
Hold on, I think I'm on mute. No, I was not on mute.
You?
Thought I was on mute. Glad I was staying quiet. So you want me to prepare the presentation for the article on lynch feasibility?
Correct.
Sure.
Can we come to consensus is okay with the committee?
Agreed.
Okay,
That
great.
sounds fine to me.
So Dr. Evans, do you have anything in your report?
I'd just like to thank WIFI and some other community partners for sponsoring an entrepreneurial challenge for some high school students. It was great to jump on as a judge yesterday and see their great ideas and their collaboration and their creativity. So thank you to WIFI for sponsoring that. It was a lot of fun and we look forward to expanding it in the future. As Michelle said, we're waiting for more guidance from the state on options for the summer camps, summer programming, and then options in the fall. Jen Alanema is chairing a working group with a wide representation from the district, and we're meeting in subgroups this afternoon to formulate some proposals that I hope to bring to the school committee in early June, related to how we're going to re-enter students and how we're going to appropriately social distance and keep everybody healthy and safe. And we'll get some guidance from the state on that as well. I have had some questions about, is there a possibility we can end the school year early? This has been a long and difficult year. And the answer is no. Unfortunately, we have to go our full 180 days. So that will put us at the closing date that I had previously announced. But the last week of school should be a little bit more celebratory and fun for students. I want to commend everybody for tremendously hard work, dedication, and resilience in what is a very difficult time. I'm so proud of our teachers and students and parents and the support we're getting from the community. So thank you to everybody. Stay the course. We will make it through to the other side and come out stronger and better. And we're working very hard behind the scenes to prepare for the fall. And that's all for superintendent's report.
So our future agenda items, we have a public hearing that's going to be virtual on school choice. That's next Friday evening. We will have a summer program planning update. It sounds like more information may be coming out of what Dr. Evans was talking about later this afternoon too. Fall 2020 social distancing plan that Dr. Evans just spoke of. So our next meeting dates are May 29th at 6 p.m. That's the public hearing. We may also attach a short school committee meeting related to town meeting to that following the public hearing. June 2nd at 9:30 we have a meeting, and June 16th at 6 p.m. we have a meeting. Can I have committee members, before we schedule the June 2nd meeting, just weigh in on whether the morning meetings, and you don't have to do it now, you can follow up with me later, whether this morning time is working, particularly around a school day, and whether a 6 p.m. meeting would be better for June 2nd. So those would be my only questions.
Just something to add on to future agenda items, Michelle, is that K-5 space utilization update. So that is something Ellen and I are happy. We really kind of wanted to do that at a meeting rather than through Zoom. These charts are pretty thick, but absolutely that's something we're happy to do at some point.
And we will also add for a future agenda item to schedule a building meeting working group offline that is sort of separate from this meeting as well, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And I think that's all we have then.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Oh, I was just going to say, and the FY 2021 school committee meeting agenda. I know I keep coming back to that.
That's what I already spoke about. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Turn.